colleagues and members of the public might wonder why we're doing this this informational forum. I think a lot of people have heard, I live in the city, and I have heard a lot about microdosing and therapeutic use, and also crossed with, it feels like right now in my lifetime, this is an all-time low in mental health. So I've always been curious about alternative and nature-based therapies. I had taken a class in February sponsored by the New York Botanical Garden. The course was taught by Eugenia Bone, who is a member of their faculty and a nature and food journalist, author, and speaker, and a teacher. And she teaches about mycophagy and psychedelic mushrooms. I was amazed by that class and never realized of all of the possibilities and the benefits that this could bring to our mental health world and etc. In our role as elected officials, I believe it is up to us to do our due diligence and stay current with the world of science. And I'll leave it now for Jason and Victor to make their comments. I will just make one quick comment that I'm not sure if I can, I just heard Rep use earlier. I hope I can hear the whole meeting. Thank you very much. Jason or Victor, you may start.
Thank you, Representative Michelle. We really appreciate all of your work on this issue and your support for our community in general. And I just want to say thank you for the community coming out and coming together to actually address this issue, to take challenging questions and controversial topics and meet them with science, reason, and compassion. And I think that's really what we're doing here. It's why our community is so strong and why we have well over 30 speakers that are signed up to be able to educate the public, educate our legislators, and educate each other. And it's going to be an incredible time. So I'm just so proud to see that this community come together. We can literally answer any question that anyone has on this, and it's just on us to build enough momentum to get this on the agenda and get it over the finish line. But I am thankful that we have state representatives like Representative Ann Hughes, Michelle, and others that could come together and really lift this issue. So as we go into the legislative session, we're ready and armed with all the information necessary. And so it's excited to see us happening a month before session starts. And so we're getting ahead of the game, and we're going to really sort of change the game after this forum. So thank you all so much for being here. Everyone at home, we really appreciate you taking the time to listen in. All the representatives that may be watching this later, if you have any questions about how to do this effectively, reach out to us. If we can't answer it directly, we have a family of experts that can help you out. So with that, I'll just say thank you very much and pass it over to our lead organizer, Victor Constanza.
Hello, everyone. I don't think I could have not said it better. So thank you very much, everyone who have come here to testify or share their stories or share the information that they have. Today is a historic day for Connecticut. I've never seen anything more. How fast it grew. Again, this only started in October, and we're all here. So again, thank you very much. And this is an opportunity for legislators and everyone. Anyone else really to learn about psilocybin. And really, just like Jason said, any question that you have, we will be able to answer it. We are here as a community. We are here in solidarity with the whole world and the working class and things of that nature. So, yes, thank you very much. And I'm very excited for what today will bring.
And I think we'll pass the mic over to State Representative Ann Hughes.
Thanks to Representative Michelle, and I'm really proud to be here on really what we're talking about is an informational forum so that we can have the latest expertise in an ancient plant-based medicine that we so desperately need. I was going to say, if I had a chance at that press conference, I just became aware of a Marine that came back and bought a house and got married and has a really good job, has already lost 3 of his Marine colleagues to suicide, and he is terrified about his own intractable depression and PTSD. And we see an epidemic of this among our veterans, and it is incumbent on us to look at every possible, accessible, effective treatment. And I'm really excited about this ancient plant-based medicine.
Rep, priorities to Chip. Yep.
Oh, sorry. Good morning, everybody. State Representative Nicole Claire DeStitria. Thank you for having me here today. I'm also ranking member on our Public Health Committee, so I'm looking forward to hearing the conversation from all the experts to see the reasons why we need to bring this drug into Connecticut. and the benefits that making it more readily accessible to the people that need it the most. And that's our job here, is to hear all sides of the story so we can go back to our constituents and our fellow legislators and give them the facts, just the scientific facts as to why this will help many, many people, hopefully, in the state of Connecticut. Thank you.
Jason, I just wanted to point out, one of our VIPs, Samuel Evans, cannot open their video. I just wanted to point it out to Dawn, just so to make sure that all panelists can open the video if they're not in person. Thank you. And I believe our first guest, and just bear with me because I have a lot of windows open here, is Sarah Gersten, Executive Director of the Last Prisoner Project.
Thank you, everyone, for being here, especially to our esteemed lawmakers. This is an incredibly important day, as you said, for us to really gather the experts and get all the information on providing safe and equitable access to psilocybin in Connecticut. My name is Sarah Gersten. I'm the Executive Director of the Last Prisoner Project, a national nonprofit working at the intersection of drug policy and criminal justice reform. I'm also a resident of West Hartford. Across the nation, we've seen more and more jurisdictions working to pass legislation to expand access to psychedelics, specifically psilocybin. States as varied as Washington, Indiana, and Massachusetts have introduced legislation, ballot initiatives, or created task forces to determine how to effectively ensure individuals have the opportunity to safely experience the medically beneficial effects of psychedelics. In 2021, Connecticut initiated its own task force to explore whether the use of psilocybin by a person under the direction of a healthcare provider may be beneficial to the person's physical or mental well-being. In 2022, that task force produced a report that concluded, quote, "There are health benefits to the therapeutic use of psilocybin, and numerous drug harm studies have found psilocybin to be safe using multiple sets of risk measures." Critically, a core component that has been altogether overlooked in every state, including here in Connecticut, is the long history of the criminalization of psychedelics and the continued enforcement of legal penalties for its usage. Despite a plethora of studies that have proven psilocybin to be a safe, effective, and non-addictive treatment for various mental health conditions, and a palpable shift in public sentiment, psilocybin continues to be criminalized and is classified as a Schedule I substance, the most dangerous drug classification. If this narrative sounds familiar, it's because it is. Like cannabis, the science and public perception of psilocybin has outpaced the policies governing the substance. This imbalance, however, has not dimmed the spotlight on psilocybin, nor has it impeded research or interest, as despite its illegal status, millions of dollars of investments are flowing into the psychedelic space. Again, a familiar pattern. If this were cannabis, we know how the story plays out. First, cannabis was made legal for medical use, and certain individuals began to profit greatly from the regulated market. Then it became fully legal for adult use, and many more began to profit, and the state began to generate millions of dollars in tax revenue from the sale of legal cannabis, nearly 26 million in combined adult use and medical sales in November of last year alone. Only then did Connecticut work to undo the harms that cannabis prohibition has caused to disproportionately impacted communities. And that work is still not done. Despite a robust legal market in Connecticut, we still have people serving cannabis-related sentences, and cannabis convictions have not been fully cleared. This is a pattern that we cannot afford to replicate with psilocybin. We know that the war on drugs was never about protecting public health or public safety. It was about further subjugating marginalized communities. Unfortunately, the stigma attached to psychedelics and psilocybin remains, despite the wide body of evidence showing that psilocybin can be a safe and effective medicine. As the recent arrest of a Burlington resident, who now faces up to 20 years for growing psilocybin shows, we continue to place stringent criminal penalties on those using and providing access for psilocybin. It is imperative that we not only make psilocybin affordable and accessible in Connecticut, but that we eliminate the related criminal penalties and provide retroactive relief for those who have suffered the detrimental consequences of our nation's failed drug war. The intention of this forum is to demonstrate that the approach used for cannabis need not be replicated. This is our chance to rewrite the story into one that prioritizes people before profit, one that aims to ameliorate the harms caused to communities before the contemplation of a consumer marketplace. It is crucial that as Connecticut looks to decriminalize psilocybin, we do it in a way that best serves the interests of justice and equity for all, and that journey begins today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah Gerson. Are there any questions from legislators? And I will remind the public that you can also fill questions in the Q&A in the Zoom. And I don't see any questions for now. I will invite to take the mic. I believe it's Courtney Barnes from Feldman Legal Advisors.
Hi, everyone. My name is Courtney Barnes. I'm an attorney based in California who has been working on the policy reform movement with respect to plant medicine since its inception in Denver in 2019. I am honored to have been a lead drafter of Denver's decriminalization of psilocybin initiative, which was a voter-initiated ordinance. And since that time, I've had the honor to work on policies in over 5 states, as well as local ordinances and resolutions in over a dozen municipalities. So today, I think I'll start with just sort of giving an overview of where we're at when it comes to policy reform throughout the country. And then I think Jason and I have a couple questions we can answer for the team before we open it up to the rest of the room. So as I started out with, 2019 served as sort of the catalyst year for the grassroots decriminalization movement that we're seeing take place across the country. Denver, a group of wonderful, passionate advocates, some of which you'll hear from later today, came with the idea of decriminalizing, or more technically, making it the lowest law enforcement priority for law enforcement to engage in the arrest and investigation and prosecution of adults 21 years of age and older for engaging in the personal use, consumption, and cultivation of psilocybin mushrooms. It was a monumental moment for the nation, as it was the first city in the country to pass something of this kind. And shortly thereafter, we started a domino effect that we've seen, spread to over half a dozen states. And after that, we had Oakland, followed by DC, Detroit. Now we have over 25 cities across the country that have passed some sort of local policy reform measure. These policy reform measures have been creative. They're not just ordinances, and they don't all just apply to psilocybin mushrooms. Denver was the first. It was the most sort of conservative measure at being a first mover, and so it was specific to psilocybin mushrooms only. The other 24, 25 and counting, actually, I believe a city in Michigan yesterday passed another resolution, all apply to natural plant medicine. So this includes ibogaine, DMT, mescaline, and other natural compounds that grow from the earth. We also now have 2 states that have passed comprehensive regulatory access models, starting with Oregon, that passed a simple decriminalization measure that applies to all controlled substances for simple possession, and it decriminalizes the personal possession of things such as psilocybin, including other compounds, as well as a regulated access model for adults 21 years of age and older to go to a state licensed facility to work with a trained state licensed facilitator and have a generally macro dose, higher dosage experience under the supervision of a state regulated clinic. You don't have to have PTSD, cancer, end of life indications. You can go for any reason of your choice. But there is now a state legal marketplace for people to get the healing or spiritual enlightenment or whatever purpose they choose in a tested and regulated and safe system. Colorado followed suit a couple years later with a broad scope decriminalization initiative that passed via voter initiative, and that decriminalized the personal use, possession, cultivation, and sharing of your natural medicine compounds. In this case, it's mescaline, ibogaine, DMT, psilocybin. and there are no possession limitations set there. There are cultivation restrictions on size, similar to you see with cannabis in some places, as well as prohibitions on any sort of sale for remuneration. You can't distribute or purchase or sell plant medicine in Colorado, but it is now no longer a crime for you to cultivate and consume your own natural products. We also then had California pass a decriminalization bill, and we had 50 bills in 2023 at least that involved some sort of topic of psychedelics, with at least 7 being successful. So it's a really incredible time for the movement right now. We're seeing progress across the entire country, not just in these, traditionally progressive states. And people need healing. We need other options. And this is, it's a natural product, and it just makes sense.
Right on. So I do have a few follow-up questions. And so we are discussing a state piece of legislation today. However, you do have extensive experience on the municipal level. Is there any recommendations that you would have for mayors, city councilors that are watching from home of how they might be able to start engaging in this conversation at the local level?
Yes. So as I mentioned, it's not just resolutions or ballot measures. We're seeing executive orders from the mayors of, for example, in Minneapolis, we've seen a district attorney issue an enforcement discretion memorandum on its choice to not spend its law enforcement resources on the prosecution of these low-level offenses. So there's a lot of creative ways that you can essentially state your municipality's policy. You don't necessarily need to pass an ordinance or a resolution. Well, that tends to be the most sort of concrete measure. There are lots of ways you can essentially divert and transfer your law enforcement attention and resources to more important and impactful crimes and priorities.
And so in both situations in Colorado and Oregon, there is state regulated access as part of the process. But do you feel that that is a necessity in order to pass decriminalization, that you also at the same time have to do the regulated access model, or can decrim stand alone as its own piece of progress?
I am in total alignment with Sarah that you absolutely do not need a regulated access model to prevent people from going to jail for using and consuming something that grows out of the earth. It's almost, I am actually a huge proponent of decriminalization first. Show the people that this isn't something that we should be criminalizing, and then create a responsible regulated access model that allows people to profit off that same compound. We've seen this with cannabis. It doesn't make any sense from a policy standpoint, nor from a justice standpoint, to do it retroactively.
Thank you. And just before my last question, I do want to just say thank you to House Majority Leader Jason Rojas for joining us today. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time to learn from us. And my last question is a bit more personal, because we do have a lot of community organizers and activists that are listening from home, and you've managed to create quite an illustrious career in this field of legal psychedelics and cannabis work. Do you have any recommendations for young folks that are getting involved into the space and in the industry of how they might be able to follow in your footsteps?
Just because it's prohibited, just because it's not allowed, doesn't mean it's impossible. That's one of the most beautiful pieces about being a lawyer in this field is creating new policy, creating a new world, creating a new system for us to operate and thrive and work together. And yeah, just because someone hasn't done it before doesn't mean that it's not your purpose to be doing it now.
I know, thank you. Yeah, do we have any questions from our representatives?
Hi, thank you. So I heard you mention that you did a lot of work with various municipalities. So why are you going to the municipalities and not going strictly on the state level?
Sure. So in the beginning, it was sort of the lowest hanging fruit. What is the easiest thing to get passed? In Denver, it's, Colorado is fortunately one state that has a ballot initiative process. So there's the citizen initiated pathway for getting legislation passed. But we knew that at the time we couldn't get city council to pass something like this. So it was a grassroots advocacy effort based on community desires and interest. And that's been a faster mechanism of getting policy reform. And the last time I checked, it was probably like 70 out of 75 city council members have voted in favor. It's almost overwhelmingly unanimous. And we're just seeing cities have more attention and time and resources devoted to what their constituents desire. And we're seeing it just be sort of an easier way to create this ripple effect, which we saw with cannabis too. Once you get enough cities, I think Michigan's got like 5 or 6 now, showing that this is what the people in their jurisdiction want, it's easier to make that argument at the state level. But we're seeing great success at the state, and I think cannabis has been a helpful sort of trailblazer in that regard of showing people that, hey, maybe the government wasn't entirely correct in how it chose to do things, 50 plus years ago.
Absolutely. Yeah, any other questions or comments? Or any questions from our panelists? Nope. All right. I think we'll move on. Thank you so much, Courtney. Really appreciate taking the time. And I believe our next speaker is speaking virtually, Peter Greenspoon.
Hello, I can finally turn on my camera.
There you are. We can see you.
Nice to be here. I'm speaking virtually because I have a broken leg. I'd love to come down to Connecticut. I'm based in Boston. So very briefly, I've been a primary care doctor for 25 years. And I also have been interested in psychedelic medicine my whole life. My father actually was a psychiatrist at Harvard Medical School, and he wrote a book in 1979 called Psychedelic Drugs Reconsidered, calling for the research into and the use of psychedelics for a lot of the indications that we're exploring them today. He was a little bit ahead of his time, but I read this book at age 13, and I've actually been interested in this stuff ever since. As mentioned, these medications have been used for thousands of years, and they were used in this country. They're studied for alcoholism, for depression in this country until the late 1960s, the early 1970s, when the war on drugs, unfortunately, stopped research for about 50 years. It started up about 10 years ago. And the data is very, very promising for a whole, it's not definitively conclusive, but it's very promising for depression, anxiety, end of life care. It's very promising for addiction, for PTSD. So stuff is really promising. And I just want to make it a point that all medicines, drugs, and substances have sort of a relative safety. When I prescribe penicillin, most of the time for strep throat, it helps the patient. But every once in a while, they can have a anaphylactic reaction and get really sick. So no drugs are absolutely safe. It's all about the relative safety. And psilocybin is relatively safe. You can't get addicted to it. I don't believe you could fatally overdose from it. Sort of like cannabis, you never hear of anybody like overdosing it. It does have some harms. I mean, like all medicines and drugs, psilocybin does have some harms. 10% of people have like bad trips, which can be scary. This can be avoided, not entirely, but largely with education and regulation. Interestingly, a not insignificant percentage of people who have quote unquote bad trips actually say it was still a meaningful experience because they're fighting with their demons or gaining deep personal insight. Occasionally mushrooms it can cause psychosis. We heard of an airplane pilot a couple of weeks ago that had this psychosis lasting a couple of days after he took a psychedelic. Now, the other things that can cause psychosis are steroids. I've had many patients, not to minimize psychosis, but steroids, amphetamines, alcohol, cannabis. So the fact that psilocybin can cause psychosis, it is no different from other medications. Cannabis is actually, I'm a cannabis specialist, the drug that's most likely to cause psychosis. But overall, psilocybin is relatively safe compared to many of the medications that I prescribe on a daily basis. I think these harms could much more productively be addressed through education and regulation. Law enforcement, in my experience with cannabis, as previous speakers have mentioned, and certainly psychedelics, are like the last people that should be involved in drug policy. Drug policy should be mediated by doctors, by nurses, by public health officials, by social workers, by addiction specialists if people get into trouble. But law enforcement literally makes everything worse. It makes the use of drugs, especially a drug like psilocybin, more dangerous. It makes the supply dangerous. There's a big gray zone now for psilocybin, and it would be so much safer if people could just grow it, gifted, or if we had a regulated market, there would be so many fewer bad experiences. And furthermore, you know, if someone's taking mushrooms, either, you know, under whatever context, if they're starting to have a bad experience, if it's criminalized, they're afraid to get help. If it's not criminalized, they can call the police for help. In the cities where we decriminalized it in Massachusetts, the police are trained to help people, not to arrest them. So it actually makes the use of this very promising substance a lot safer to decriminalize it. And again, I just think I'm going to conclude by saying, again, law enforcement are just the wrong people to be involved with it. I'm really in favor of decriminalization, and through careful education of the safe dose, safe supply, and regulation, so that, you know, there is a good supply. I think this is the way to go. It would make all of it a lot safer, and it would really facilitate our ability to investigate psilocybin for all the very promising benefits. And furthermore, it would just make it safer for all the people that are taking it. Why criminalize something that people are going to do anyways? And there's so much growing awareness of the benefits. People are going to be taking mushrooms. Why give them the chance of criminal entanglement with the criminal justice system? This just makes everything more stressful and dangerous. And I'll conclude with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Greenspoon. Are there any questions for the good doctor on the medical efficacy or challenges of psilocybin? We have one from Representative Hughes.
Thank you, Doctor. I'm really curious in terms of prescription or clinical oversight. When you talk about help for people experiencing, let's just say, bad side effects, whatever they are, what kind of help and support is effective?
Well, for example, I have a relative who started microdosing psilocybin, and she had a really bad experience with it. She had very bad insomnia. She couldn't sleep for like 10 nights. Now, this is very unusual for psilocybin. Again, this is one of the rare side effects. But, you know, she felt comfortable talking to her primary care doctor. She felt comfortable talking to her psychiatrist, and she felt comfortable asking for a specialist in psychedelics. And as a consequence, working together, we were able to educate her, treat the problem, and get her back on track really quickly. Now, this is just because she feels comfortable, but with the criminalization, most people don't feel comfortable. They're afraid to even go to the emergency room. I mean, it's a Schedule I substance. I mean, hypothetically, you could get your kids taken away from you, like they still do in some states with cannabis. So I just think openness and decriminalization, there are treatments for these things. If someone's having a bad trip, you can give them a sedative, and you could just give them a calming, you know, environment to just let it wear off. But again, the more people are afraid to do this, the less help they're going to get. And to the extent that they are comfortable asking for help, these are all things that we could easily manage medically.
Thank you so much. And are you aware of the research coming out of UC Berkeley on guided support for psychedelics?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a huge favorite. You know, it's interesting. Some programs and a lot of discussion just talk about like the drug, but it's really the drug and the therapy that helps people. I mean, I don't think the drug is that harmful, and people want to take it in the woods with friends. You know, they could do it safely, have one person who's not taking it that can, if there is a problem, they could take care of the problem and don't take a huge dose. But it is really, really promising, the psychedelic assisted therapy, more than just the drug itself per se.
Mm-hmm. Any additional questions? Seeing none, thank you so much, Peter. Yeah. All right, our next speaker is Dr. Jordan Sloshauer. At 10:15. Okay. So we can move down a little bit. Actually, why don't we go to Aaron Doolittle?
Sure, no problem, no problem. Okay, hi. So I'm Erin Doolittle. I'm not entirely sure where I'm supposed to be looking, but I am a marriage and family therapist. I have been for about 20 years. I specialize in trauma. And prior to that, I worked in special education. So I've spent a lot of time in spaces with people that are dealing with pretty severe mental health issues. I've also spent an extensive amount of time as an advocate, a provider, and an activist in the cannabis space. certifying and providing ongoing care for hundreds of patients in the Connecticut Medical Marijuana Program. What I've learned over the course of my time in the therapist chair is that the most healing and important aspect of the therapeutic journey is meeting people where they're at, listening to them from a non-judgmental, neutral position to determine how best to meet their needs. I've witnessed the effects of prohibition of a plant that has had on citizens from all walks of life. I've seen the aftermath of enforcement and incarceration in countless families and individuals throughout the years. What I've learned is people are in pain, they're suffering, and no amount of talk therapy by itself is going to cure what ails them. I support my patients. They try medication after medication. We monitor the side effects, the weight gain, struggles to sleep, loss of libido, loss of interest in daily life, anxiety too severe to allow them to function, despite being fully compliant with the therapy and the medication that they're supposed to be taking. But the shame and the disappointment that comes from those things failing to help them progress, to decrease their symptoms for any substantial amount of time, to be able to thrive instead of merely survive is often just as traumatic as whatever brought them to my office, because they're feeling like a failure day after day after day. The biggest barriers cannabis patients' office face are stigma and fear of law enforcement. Confusion over what the law says versus what helps them leads to higher anxiety and depression. No one wants to break the law. No one wants to get in trouble. They just want to feel better. They want to be able to get to work on time, be there for their kids, their spouses, and have energy for their own self-care. Prohibition has created intergenerational trauma that continues on in the present day. I've seen and can attest to the devastation of a family when a member is incarcerated, as well as when they return to society. We now have an opportunity to decriminalize another natural holistic medicine. We all know cannabis and psilocybin were never outlawed for public safety or public health concerns because a loving government doesn't want you to jump out of a window. That's not why they were criminalized. Psilocybin, we know, actually creates connections in the brain that are measurable and undeniable. The ability to increase neuroplasticity is essential to one's ability to change their mind, take in new information, see and experience different perspectives from a more loving and accepting place. Psilocybin is considered an entheogenic medicine, meaning it connects the user to the divine, to a higher power, to a more loving worldview. While that might sound a little bit hippy-dippy, it has to be mentioned that due to many factors ranging from the proliferation of social media, a global pandemic, oversaturation of media depicting violent and often terrifying daily realities, a world that seems constantly at war at home and abroad, it's no wonder people are feeling more hopeless and disconnected than ever. The loss of connection to the divine, to awe, to joy, to wonder is egregiously harmful to us as individuals and as a society. When I'm discussing cannabis and psilocybin mushrooms with people, I explain that I consider cannabis to kind of be the daily driver. It's going to get you through your day. It's going to give you some energy, some motivation, some relief. Mushrooms are more of the heavy lifters. They're going to be able to really lift the user up out of their own tiny worldview where they're stuck and they can't see the forest for the trees into a broader, more positive perspective. Microdosing has been shown to help sufferers of major depressive disorder when all else has failed. The VA itself is now implementing studies in psilocybin. They've been using ketamine for years because they know how helpful it is for PTSD. The macrodosing, the bigger dosing that people tend to talk about, the tripping, that's been shown to not only bring the user tremendous relief while under the influence directly of the psilocybin, but for days, weeks, months, or years afterward. So there are plenty of experts in this room today that are going to be able to break down and explain the scientific and medical research and evidence as to the efficacy of psilocybin and psychedelic therapies in general. I'm here to advocate for professionals of the medical and mental health community to reclaim psychedelic practices that were widely used with great success for decades before the war on drugs removed that essential tool from our toolboxes. So providers such as myself have witnessed the failure of traditional antidepressant and anti-anxiety medications. We've watched with concern as our patients have to deal with titrating, weaning off, weaning on. We've sat with our clients for years, seeing little progress. They should not be afraid to come to us with this stuff. Our patients should be able to come to us and say, I want to use psilocybin, I want to use psychedelic medicine, I want to use cannabis with no shame, no fear of enforcement. No one's going to come knock down their doors. So if you kind of, if you care about public safety, recognize people are going to do this. They're already doing it. So the answer to any sort of, safety issue or concern is access to professionals in safe spaces who are trained, who seek to reclaim this resource that was so widely used. No one should go to jail for a plant or a fungus. So thank you for your time today. I'm sorry I went a little bit over, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
So do we have any questions from the audience? I have a few. Oh. And apologies, this is definitely my fault, but we should end the clapping because it disrupts the audio for the microphones. And so very excited. You want to wave jazz hands, and support, that'll work, but just keep the actual clapping to a minimum. But I believe we have a question from State Representative Hughes.
Aaron, you spoke about and I really appreciate this, the lack of, we have to catch up as mental health professionals, as social workers, with the research that was, effectively shut down. And we have a lot of catch up of learning to do. So how do you suggest that the mental health community go about that?
There are actually some really excellent resources out there now coming more and more. I've used psychedelics today for training and supervision and things like that. I've looked at models from Oregon and from other therapists that have actually written guides. There is tremendous, access now to YouTube and experts who, at the moment, I'm blanking because I'm just having a moment, but it is available. And the studies that were done back, 50 years ago, those are still available too. And kind of watching what Yale's doing. I'm always interested to see what they're up to. Their studies have been really interesting. We're going to hear from one of their doctors shortly. And just, talking to people generally and gathering my own anecdotal evidence, gathering my own observations, and making it an effort to go out and talk to people about this.
And finally, again, in the mental health space, I'm keenly interested in how the synthetic drugs, especially antidepressants, have really failed in this moment and produce really unacceptable side effects. And so when you talked about the neural pathways and really making that interconnectivity, which we can study in the brain science, I just thought maybe you could speak to that. Really, we've had a whole several generations hijacked by the pharmaceuticals, and now we are returning to a plant-based medicine that may be far more effective. And I just thought you might talk about that.
I agree with this. The psychedelic therapy never really should have been taken away from therapists. We always should have been able to access this for our patients. And yeah, we've had to sort of stand by and watch as the promised land of antidepressants and SSRIs and SNRIs have come through. And, we've watched our patients actually get sicker, develop kidney or liver issues, developed increased psychosis or suicidality. When we kind of had the answers all along, it's just that they didn't really make anybody any money. So, when it comes to cannabis and psilocybin, they didn't know how to make money off of that. So they figured out how to do it with these pills that work for some, but for the vast majority, they really don't, leading to people feeling like failure, burning out, and just giving up on therapy completely. And that is the last thing we want. We want them to know, like, we hear you, we see you, we're going to help you, not just throw pills at you. So many people come to me and say, oh, the last person I talked to, that's all they wanted to do. That's terrible. There's so much more we can do. So, let's try to get it done.
Any other questions? Okay.
I have a multi-part question. Erin, are you a prescriber?
No, I am just a therapist.
Okay. So from listening to you, it sounds like you spend a lot of time with people who use both SSRIs, MAOIs, as well as psychedelics. Is that correct?
Yeah, but more and more of my patients really come to me. They're very proud to say they've gotten off their medication.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful to hear. That actually brings up another question. But in your experience, as far as safety goes, do you find that those who are on antidepressant, antipsychotic type medications experience more or less adverse effects than the ones that you see that come in to you having used psychedelics?
No, not necessarily at all, actually. Like I have seen people who are on SSRIs able to use psilocybin effectively without the scary serotonin sickness. I generally have them, microdose ahead of time, so you sort of know how you're going to feel. Let's get a scope on that. If they're on MAOIs, for example, they're absolutely contraindicated. You cannot do this medicine. It's a no. But nothing else is really contraindicated that strongly for psilocybin specifically. So it's a pretty safe medication. There's no risk for addiction, and they use it once and they tend to just never, sometimes never do it again.
So are you seeing less adverse effects with people who primarily use psychedelics?
Yes, yeah, I have not, knock on wood, even when, the effects are upsetting and there's, there's crying and there's grieving and there's a lot of, emotional movement. It's never unsafe. They know where they are. They know what's going on. People have this idea that they're going to be totally out of their mind and have no idea what's happening to them. And that's just really not true with psilocybin. So, it's pretty easy to ground them and remind them, hey, this is what we came to do today. You're doing just fine. And the only real, tough side effect that happens sometimes is they get a little nauseous. And, okay, we get through that and they're all right.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. And then my last question is, you are a family therapist, correct? Right. And so there are lots of parents that are wondering how to have this conversation with their kids, or kids that are bringing this conversation to their parents. Do you have any recommendations for parents navigating this conversation with their children?
I think it's pretty much similar to the alcohol conversation, to any other conversation. This stuff is for adults. This is ours. You don't, you need to respect that, and that when you're old enough, sure, maybe you'll try it, maybe you won't, but it's the same as anything else. You need to respect your adults' privacy. You need to respect that this is medicine, and that there's nothing wrong with it. You guys are going to hear stuff in school, you're going to hear stuff from the outside, but here in this house, you can ask all the questions you want, and we're going to tell you the truth. And, that's all you really need to know.
Sorry. Thank you. Any further questions from our elected officials? No? All right. Thank you so much, Aaron. So we're going to go down the list here and see who is available online. Is Sloshauer with us yet? Or Dr. Monica Williams?
Yeah, I'm here,
Okay.
Dr. Sloshauer.
Hey, there we go. Right on, brother. Thank you so much for joining us. You have the floor.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be here. Now I'm looking at myself on the Zoom. So my name is Dr. Jordan Sloshauer. I'm a psychiatrist in private practice right now, also a clinical instructor at Yale University in the Department of Psychiatry. Over the last 6 or 7 years, I ran and was a therapist and study physician in 2 clinical trials of psilocybin-assisted therapy for major depression. So that's really my where I'm coming at this primarily from. Also, just want to acknowledge that when we're talking about psychedelics right now, there's a few different conversations going on federally and on state levels. Of course, one is the use of psilocybin as a medical treatment, which I can speak to in the context of the trials I was running. And then some states are considering more wellness kind of models where there's supervised access to psilocybin, but you don't need to carry a specific medical or psychiatric diagnosis to safely access the medicine. And then, of course, there's broader decriminalization measures that are being considered as well. I'm happy to sort of speak to any of those that would be helpful. I guess just to share a tiny bit before I open up for questions, that psilocybin for depression is probably the leading indication at the moment, though this is speaking to the medical side, though there are psilocybin therapies being looked at across a number of different psychiatric disorders, as well as even some other neurologic disorders like headache disorders that are being looked at Yale, as well as even functional medical disorders like GI distress and things of that nature. So it's being looked at for across a variety of different conditions, which is very interesting, both in terms of how we think it works and that it can have broad application. But we've been looking at it for depression at trials at Yale. It's and so here in Connecticut, and then there's two different companies, one nonprofit and for-profit, that are pursuing psilocybin therapy through the FDA channels and are going to be moving into phase 3 trials, which is the stage that FDA would need to actually approve it and reschedule it out of Schedule 1. And we were part at Yale of it was a multi-site phase 2 trial with USONA Institute that I was part of. So that was a larger efficacy trial that was just published in JAMA, in the Journal of American Medical Association, which is a very good quality journal, and was very significant results. Dr. Jerry Sanacora at Yale was actually our site PI, and he's a very cautious and skeptical researcher, and he even commented that the results were quite surprising and very promising for psilocybin as a treatment in this context. Though, of course, it does need to be put through the phase 3 studies, which will be forthcoming, both by USONA and Compass Pathways is another company pursuing this form of therapy. As far as the trial that we ran and that was just published, very large effect sizes, very large improvements in depression for psilocybin compared to placebo, with quite a good safety profile. Not to say that this is without risk, and just to be clear that in the studies, we're very carefully selecting participants, and we're providing a lot of support, both before and during and after the treatment. So it's really not just a drug treatment. I don't frame it as such. It's really a drug-assisted therapy kind of model, administering the drug in a very supportive and therapeutic context. Again, that being necessary, I believe, when dealing with populations like the ones we were dealing with that have moderate to severe mental health conditions, whether that degree of care and support is necessary for the general adult population. Likely not, but in this context, that was how we provided the therapy. And I thought, just to obviously, we could talk data. I did speak to the large effect sizes, but just to give one, I think it's important to also recognize that this is not a magic bullet therapy, as sometimes the media portrays. I mean, there's a lot of excitement. It doesn't work for everyone, and there's caveats here, but I did want to share, I thought, just a quote from one of the participants in the trial that I ran at Yale, just to give a sense of how this, it's an experiential therapy in a lot of ways, in addition to the medicine having potentially positive neuroplastic effects on the brain and neurochemical effects. A lot of it has to do with the experience that people have with the medicine in a therapeutic context that then allows them to make changes in their life. And so I thought I'd just share at least one quote, and I have a lot of interviews recorded from participants as well. This one 40-year-old male who'd been experiencing depression on and off for 5 or 6 years at this point, shared, he said, the clinical trial at Yale was a lifeline. For months, I worked closely with therapists to prepare for what would become one of the most consequential days of my life. Words can hardly describe how revelatory, profound, and transformative the experience was. It produced insights seemingly from a different place entirely, a realm of fundamental truth that is buried deeper and deeper within our minds as we grow older. Thrust into this realm, I gained insights about life, its meaning, and my values, not through logic or reasoning, but unmediated intuitive knowledge. I was able to resolve internal conflicts and have been living a happy, healthy life ever since, full of gratitude, full of love and gratitude. And this was about a year after he'd received the treatment. So I'd be happy to take any questions or be a resource to you all, even after this session.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sloshow. I do believe we have questions from our esteemed host, State Representative Michelle, virtually.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Slushauer, for your comments. I believe you addressed it, but I just wanted to maybe emphasize on this because there was a question during the presser about what Yale's findings or latest findings were. Could you go back as to what those latest findings have shown? Because I know you spoke about several phases, and I just want to go back to what probably was the most revealing information.
Sure, sure. Yeah. So there's been a number of studies that we've been running at Yale. I ran initially a small study with psilocybin therapy for depression that was really looking at mechanism. How does it work? It wasn't a study that was trying to determine whether or not it's helpful for depression, because you need larger studies for that. So in my smaller study, we did actually see some pretty impressive effects from the therapy, but also we found some interesting stuff using EEG biomarkers in the brain, and saw, that 2 weeks after psilocybin, there was notable changes in certain markers of neuroplasticity. So, looking at how this might work, the question is, if you have one drug experience and then it's out of your system, how are people still having positive effects 6 months later, for instance? So looking at that on neurobiologic levels, and of course more the experiential levels, like the participant just shared, if you resolve internal conflicts you've been dealing with for years, then that frees you up as well. And then probably more notably, at least on we call the efficacy side, we ran we were one of several sites around the country doing this phase 2 study through the USONA Institute, which is one of 2 entities pursuing psilocybin therapy approval through the FDA. So we were one site of many, but that overall trial with 100 participants nationwide was just published and did show a very large effect size, meaning the group who received psilocybin therapy as opposed to the comparator had a very much larger improvements in their depression, and not just impressively, not just at a 1-week endpoint, but actually at day 42. So is that a 6-week endpoint was actually the primary. So again, like lasting improvements from the single dose, again, in the context of supportive therapy that we were providing, and again, with a pretty good safety profile. There were no serious adverse events in the trial, meaning no one ended up hospitalized, no one ended up with a significant, medical condition. There was, of course, nausea, headache, a number of things of that nature that do go along with psilocybin therapy. So it's not, again, without any problems or risks or things that need to be looked for. And again, it was a highly selected population, which we need to clarify, but certainly very promising, and was enough to now moving into the next phase 3, we would call it, which are going to be even larger studies that the FDA requires.
Thank you very much. Jason, you can take over.
Thank you. And any other questions from our audience here?
I do have a question.
Go for it.
Hello, Dr. Sloshauer. Thank you so much for taking the time. These are just questions just to clarify, because these are questions that we face when speaking to legislators or mental health professionals or anyone in the public. In your clinical studies and clinical research, has there been, after someone takes a dose of psilocybin and goes to the treatment, has there been an increase in suicidality?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'll do my best. I'd really have to get granular into it. This did get a little attention more from the Compass Pathways study that was published within the past year or so. That they did show some increases, I believe, in suicidality. In our USONA trial, there was really nothing significant along those lines. I don't know. I think the larger studies are going to be needed to really see if that's significant for a drug-related effect. I think when we're in these studies, we're really enrolling people with severe depression, and we actually rule out in some of these studies, people with acute suicidal ideation. So it's not a full treatment population. I don't think the studies have. So I think from the Compass Pathways study, yes, it showed that this is something we're going to need to definitely keep an eye out as the studies progress. I don't think it's a major, it certainly wasn't a stop point or anything like that. Conventional antidepressants carry a black box warning for increased suicidal ideation. And even with those, the data supporting that is not fantastic. But of course, we still use those very heavily in this country. So I think to some degree we need to. It's population specific. I don't know if it's really drug specific at this point. And I think a lot of it has to do with the support and that at least in those clinical populations, we're going to need to provide that support when treating those people. Is that an effect in the general population of use? I do not believe there's any data to support that it's generally a risk for healthy adults.
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you, Victor. Any other questions? Nope. All right. Dr. Sloshauer, we appreciate you taking the time to educate us and for your work here in the state of Connecticut. We'll definitely be keeping a close eye on making sure that that work is supported, expanded, and decriminalized. All right. So next, yeah, thank you. We may have Dr. Monica Williams. Is she on yet? Nope. If not, we will go to Ismail Ali of the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. Is he ready?
Yes. Can you all hear and see me?
There we go. Yes, we can. Thank you so much, Mr. Ali. You have the floor.
Great. Good day, everyone. Thank you for the invitation, Jason and colleagues. My name is Ismail Laredo Ali. I'm based in Oakland, California. So forgive my scratchy voice. I think I'm dealing with the 100-day cough that so many people across the country are navigating post-COVID or flu or anything. I'm going to spend a couple minutes today just speaking a little bit about the lay of the land of psychedelic policy broadly. I know that this has been touched on a bit. Dr. Sloshauer touched on this a bit, and I think other speakers will as well. But the intention really here is just to put some of the work that's happening in Connecticut in context with the rest of the country and the kind of process and implementation or ongoing discussion about some of these different frameworks. So I am an attorney. I work currently as the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, where I've been for the last 8 years almost, working kind of at the intersection of drug policy, mental health, and healthcare policy, and how exactly we think about implementation or engagement with those systems, working in the field of psychedelic policy reform broadly. So the first thing I'll say is that a lot of big lessons were learned around federalism and how state and federal governments interact with respect to drug policy through the process of cannabis reform. And I'm not saying that to say that we should or that there even is that much necessarily parity between cannabis reform processes and processes that have been happening with psychedelic policy over the last few years. There is some overlap. But I say that to say that I know that at the state level in a number of places, including potentially Connecticut, there are ongoing conversations about how exactly to interact from the state perspective with the reality of federal regulations, relationships, and so on, between the Controlled Substances Act, the FDA, DEA, and so on. So what I'll start with by saying is that generally speaking, I have in my own mind kept those processes fairly separate. Many of you may be familiar already or are aware that there are, to Dr. Sloshauer's point, studies that are FDA approved, that are reviewed by FDA and DEA or other relevant bodies that are doing research, that are doing clinical research, whether it's for the intention of academic science or drug development or something in between. So I say that to say that most of the state level programs that have been brought forward so far, which I'll touch on briefly in a second, have operated pretty much as like kind of closed loop internal state programs, federal or state legal licensure programs that have basically all of the pieces tip to tail sorted within the state independently of the federal government. That's relevant because, to Dr. Sloshauer's point, whether you have kind of different approaches, this medical use approach, as well as what we're talking about at the state level, which may take more of an adult use or wellness approach that may not have, for example, a diagnosis requirement, which is quite a significant difference when it comes to the point of access. I think there was a therapist earlier who spoke a little bit to also the factor of diagnosis, the factor of medication, and so on. So I think maybe the main takeaway I'm trying to get to here is that there's actually quite a diversity of approaches that are being proposed. Really before 2020, 2019, this was really just a theoretical conversation. As many of you know, Measure 109 was passed in November 2020, kind of starting the conversation about what a state legal program could look like. There was lots of discussion up to that point. When that initiative was in front of voters, it passed, and we're now after the 2-year kind of pre-implementation period. And I'm sure folks from Oregon and officials from Oregon can speak a little bit more specifically now. But last I heard, something over 600 or 700 people had been treated or had gone through the program over the course of 2023, at least, in the first year of its actual implementation after the 2-year kind of runway where they sorted through a bunch of questions. Colorado is going through a very similar process. Proposition 122, as many of you may be familiar, was passed in November of now 2 years ago, 2022. But notably also had a personal use decrim element added. So that's particularly interesting because what Colorado is doing right now is in the pre-implementation period, figuring out how exactly do you hold both a decriminalized framework where personal use and limited services are potentially permitted under that framework, as well as a license framework where you have fully regulated quality control tip to tail, you could say. I think that's particularly interesting because, speaking kind of in response a bit to the therapist who was speaking earlier, it is absolutely true that use continues in the underground or in unregulated settings. That is the reality for most people who've had experiences with psychedelics. And the kind of realism, I think, of holding decriminalization and holding the reduction of criminalization alongside the potential creation of regulated state programs where you have some sort of interaction with the medical system, I think is the direction that I'm seeing a number of states go. 2023 was really the year where regulated adult use programs like Colorado and Oregon started to get tested at the level of the legislature. None passed out of the legislature last year. And I think this is the year where we'll see a little bit more kind of states as lab style experimentation. Not in like the, we're going to do something crazy kind of way, but in the, we actually are iterating as we go on what the ideal policy approach is for this. The nice thing about decriminalization in particular is that it's clean and straightforward. It's eliminating criminal penalties to kind of allow for certain, whether it's broader communication, more civil society, more engagement among community to occur. And then, whether or not a state decides to move into kind of a wellness adult use framework is then a question that has usually a lot to do with local agencies. How do different boards or other local bodies actually interact with a program like that? How do you do screening and so on? There's a few different major issues that I know are up: safety, accessibility, consumer protection, and framing. And I know my time's almost up, so I'll just spend 30 seconds on the consumer protection piece because I do think that that's important. I'm happy to get into questions about the rest. But I just want to flag that because of the visibility in the media and because of the momentum and the point that Dr. Sloshar was making, that it's not a silver bullet. The therapist also spoke to that. A lot of people come in being like, oh, I really, I'm looking for something really significant. And while the experience is significant for a number of people, I do think that there is a factor in thinking about advertising, promotions, claims, and kind of what requirements, if any, are there for people to be participating in an ecosystem. Whether it's cultivators or manufacturers or distributors or consumers themselves or people who are offering services. Just because there's a lot of exciting, I think, room ahead, and also a lot of room to practice and to learn and iterate on how these policies go forward, just in the face of all of the challenges and so on. So there's also issues about cost of services, cost of care, and so on. But I'll pause there because I know that was a lot, and I'm happy to answer questions about any of the above or any related issues at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. Any questions from our folks in the room? I do have a question myself. So as someone that has worked on many different states and advised many different legislators across different states, have there been any central themes in their concerns or requests, policy-wise of you, that you see happening over and over again as states start to have these conversations? And how
Yeah,
would you address them?
definitely. I would say there's probably there's probably 3 to 4. One being, I think the note that maybe you made earlier about children, how to talk to youth about this. A number of people have their first experiences as teenagers. That's a kind of a common trope, in fact. And while I do think that's changing, I think the visibility around psychedelics actually is, like we saw with cannabis, actually affecting like the starting age Some people call it the graying of cannabis, where you have kind of the initial age of use or ongoing age of use increasing as elders and seniors realize that there may be benefits from THC. I think we're actually seeing a similar thing happen with psychedelics more slowly, potentially. But that's one, just about like the age factor. And then I think the other actually has a lot to do with crisis response. This is particularly true in jurisdictions that are considering decriminalization and may be seen as less important, although I do think it's quite important even for places that are looking at regulated adult use programs. But I think that's the other one where you know, even though, and I don't know if Kevin Matthews has already spoken today or not, but you know, even though the kind of information that came out of Denver and some of the reports that the city panel put together to show kind of effects on ER, police reports, and so on, have, as far as I know, shown little to no increase in any of those kind of significant concerns. There is also, I think, coming from both parents and also the public, you know, concern about like crisis. What happens when something goes wrong, if and when someone does have an adverse event that's then like not able to be controlled or managed in the setting that it's occurring. So the other big theme I've seen is like, how do we ensure that first responders, not just law enforcement, but unarmed crisis response, mental health co-responders, EMTs, fire, so on, people who are called in times of mental health crisis, how are they prepared exactly? Are they ready to de-escalate? And I'll just note here that this is not an issue that's just about psychedelics. The conversation about how we navigate mental health and mental health crisis is an ongoing nationwide conversation. But I flag it because there are some overlaps in the way that crisis response might be thought about. And I think the key detail here that I'll just put in a plug for is this unarmed crisis response element. Like, how exactly do you have the de-escalation tactics trained within an emergency medical or emergency system, such that if things do fall through the cracks, if the other mechanisms for keeping people safe aren't able to be maintained, that there's some sort of kind of safety net there. And again, that's a more macro problem than just about this issue, but I would say those are two really, really big themes. And then maybe a third has to do with scopes of practice and how to actually integrate and be in relationship, where you have like currently licensed, board certified or board overseen medical professionals. And sometimes there's questions about how exactly those medical professionals can practically, but also legally engage with the state legal program if they're dealing with both federal and state regulations, for example, DEA licensing and the like.
Thank you for that explanation. Any other questions for Mr. Ali from the audience? No. All right. Thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you for being a resource for all of our legislators in the future.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great one.
Yeah, thank you. And so we're going to circle back to see if Dr. Monica Williams is available. If not, we will go to Mason Marks. Is Mason available?
Yes, I'm here.
There we go. Right on. Thank you so much, Mason, for joining us today. You have the floor.
Thank you so much. I really want to thank the organizers and legislators who are present today. You've really done a great job of assembling a very diverse panel of real experts in this area. I am a law professor. I've taught drug policy since 2019. I'm currently a visiting professor of law at Harvard Law School, where I'm co-teaching a course on psychedelic law this semester. I'm often in New Haven, where I'm a visiting fellow at Yale's Information Society Project. I'm also currently writing a book for Yale Press about psychedelic law. And in 2021, I was fortunate to co-found a very unique project at Harvard Law School's Petrie-Flom Center for Health Policy, Biotechnology, and Bioethics, called the Project on Psychedelics Law and Regulation, or POPLAR. We've been studying psychedelic law, ethics, and commercialization for almost 3 years now. I should say that I'm speaking only on my own behalf today, however. So I really want to focus on decriminalization and emphasize the importance of education rather than criminalization. And you've already heard from several speakers that a lot can be achieved simply through education. And I also agree with Jason Ortiz, who said at the start that decriminalization is really a policy based on science, reason, and compassion. And I agree with that. So I want to give you a few reasons why I think decriminalization is based on reason, science, and compassion. One reason that it should be an appealing policy for you is that it has no regulatory cost associated with it. It can actually save the state money. In 2021, California's Legislative Analyst's Office estimated the economic impact of a statewide decriminalization bill and determined that it could save the state up to $3 million. And I don't have a lot of faith in these estimates necessarily, but I think the point is that it's not going to cost the state money. There's no regulatory cost, and it could save the state money, potentially a very significant amount of money. That's what I would say is the takeaway there. In contrast to decriminalization, state regulated programs like the supervised use programs that you've heard come up a few times, these are very expensive. In fact, they're turning out to be sort of bottomless money pits for the states that pass them, including Oregon. Their industry for supervised adult use opened this past summer. And it was pitched during the campaign prior to the 2020 election as being self-sufficient, paying for itself by 2023. But by the end of 2022, the Oregon Health Authority reported that they were running out of money for the program. They had to ask the state legislature for an additional $6 million, over $6 million, to keep the lights on for 2 years. Ultimately, they only received $3.1 million last year. That's probably not going to last very long, more than a year or much longer than that. And so it's a big question, where's the money going to come from? It's just very, very expensive. So I really want to nudge the legislators away from this idea of a therapeutic or even a supervised adult use model like we're seeing in Oregon and Colorado. And I know a lot about these programs because I served on the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board from the outset of the program. And I chaired the licensing subcommittee there. I'm also very familiar with decriminalization, being the primary drafter of Seattle's decriminalization resolution. And I would say that really the FDA will take care of that, and that's very important, the therapeutic use, and we don't need to recreate the FDA here in Connecticut. I also agree with some of the other speakers, Dr. Grinspoon, Courtney Barnes, who you heard from, suggesting that decriminalization should be a priority, that should occur first. Another reason to support decriminalization is that many states allow home cultivation of cannabis to promote equitable and affordable access. And I think the same applies to psilocybin. I also think that cultivation and sharing is an important part of this type of policy reform. That's something that does exist in Colorado state law, and it's being proposed in other states, including Massachusetts and others. In addition to being less expensive than these heavily regulated programs, decriminalization also does not conflict with federal law, which is kind of incredible. If you reduce or eliminate criminal penalties for psilocybin in Connecticut, due to our system of federalism that we have, that does not conflict with federal law the way that these supervised state regulated programs do in Oregon and Colorado. And I argue that those programs conflict with federal law far more than state cannabis regulation for various reasons I can get into if you're interested. So there is a very significant risk of a backlash from federal agencies like the FDA, the DEA, even the Federal Trade Commission. This is something that I wrote about last month in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And then perhaps most importantly, decriminalization, as you heard from other speakers, does encourage people to seek medical attention should they need it. This is something that has been acknowledged recently by the director of the National Institutes on Drug Abuse, NIDA, Dr. Nora Volkow, last year raised this with an international audience, that when you criminalize drug use, people are less likely to seek medical attention if they do happen to need it. And in states where people are criminalized, if they report an overdose, if one of their friends uses an opioid and overdoses and dies, in states where that is criminalized, that is associated with higher rates of opioid use. It's hard to establish a causal link, but there is that relationship. I think the last thing I'll say is that this is likely the most common approach to psychedelics reform. There are 2 states that have decriminalized psilocybin to some extent, Oregon and Colorado. Over 20 US cities have decriminalized. Most of them have decriminalized a handful of substances, psychedelic plants and fungi, usually 5 or so. Somerville and Cambridge, Massachusetts decriminalized most drugs, as has Oregon. So there are a variety of different approaches, but here, if we're just talking about psilocybin, as you've heard from many people, it is a very a non-toxic substance based on our current science that we have to go off. It does appear to be non-addictive. In fact, it even appears to have anti-addictive properties. And there can be adverse events, but I would argue that they do appear to be serious adverse events, appear to be very rare. And decriminalization actually increases safety, which could be counterintuitive, but for the reasons I mentioned, it actually promotes safety and public health. So I'll end there. Thank you so much. Happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any, excuse me, do we have any questions? Yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Marks. I wanted to ask, do you think it's an effective strategy to start with just decriminalizing psilocybin and then include other substances later on, as other areas have, or to go for an approach where you are looking at multiple substances from the beginning?
I think it makes sense to decriminalize certainly the naturally occurring psychedelic substances that a lot of cities and Colorado have decriminalized. I think that makes a lot of sense, but it depends on what the legislators are willing to do.
Do we have any additional questions? So I do have one clarifying, because there was some news out of the DEA that spore kits or microscopy kits are legal, while the molecule psilocybin or psilocybin producing mushrooms are still illegal. Can you explain why that is the case, that the beginning stages of this fungus are criminalized, or not criminalized, but the fruit producing bodies are?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's very simple. It's just because the spores don't actually contain psilocybin. So there's no illegal or controlled substance in the spores. And once they've actually matured and produced psilocybin, then they become fall under the Schedule 1 category. I thought you were going to ask me about the Georgia warning letter from the DEA. So I'll just mention that really quickly.
Yeah,
the
please do.
DEA sent a letter to Georgia pharmacists warning them not to dispense medical cannabis, because Georgia has this kind of unusual law where it's pharmacies that dispense cannabis, not marijuana dispensaries. And that kind of signals that maybe the cannabis industry is not quite as safe as some people assume that it is from DEA attention, and blending healthcare with a Schedule 1 controlled substance the way that Georgia is, and the way that Colorado and arguably Oregon are with their supervised programs, could come under the spotlight of the DEA.
Yeah, thank you for that. My other question also points to the actual presence or not of psilocybin in determining how criminal an activity may have been by an individual. So for example, here in Connecticut, we had somebody that was recently arrested, and there was a very large number thrown out of $8.5 million worth of psilocybin, when in fact it was probably, we don't know for certain, a significant amount of substrates, mycelium. Can you explain how you might help folks understand what should be weighed when we're talking about the relative penalties for that person's possession?
Yeah, there is a trend towards specifying in state and local laws that it's the actual chemical substance that you're talking about, the weight of that substance in grams or milligrams, that should determine the penalty, rather than any container or substrate or other material. That's a very outdated approach, sort of taking the entire mass of material that the substance that's regulated is found within, whether it's a solution like water or alcohol, or a substrate like manure or some kind of rye or something like that. So I think that's a great point to distinguish. If you're talking about penalties, you're referring solely to the regulated substance.
Fantastic. Any other questions from the audience? No, I think we are all set. Thank you very much, Mr. Marks. We appreciate your support and your ongoing support for our legislative process here.
Thank you.
And next we'll have Dr. Monica Williams join virtually.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here. My name's Dr. Monica Williams. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I am the clinical and training director of the Behavioral Wellness Clinic in Tallinn, Connecticut. I'm also a tenured professor at the University of Ottawa in Ontario in Canada. And my research is focused on mental health and mental health disparities, particularly the mental health of communities of color. And much of my research interest in psychedelics involves having options for people who may be suffering from trauma, including trauma from the experience of being a marginalized or a stigmatized person or racialized person. And so I'm very interested in making sure that these substances are available for mental health purposes, particularly for communities that may be suffering from the most trauma and other mental health conditions, as well as a result of being marginalized and because of barriers to care. And so at our clinic in Tallinn, Connecticut, we obviously can't offer psilocybin assisted therapy, although we hope to at some point, should it become legal. We do offer ketamine assisted therapy, and we've been involved with MAPS and their clinical trials involving MDMA assisted therapy for PTSD. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk about also was that, we've done research, we've done nationwide surveys of people who've used these substances naturalistically. As has been pointed out, there's, very few medical concerns about these substances. And in fact, many people have talked about experiences of growth, decreases in symptoms of traumatization, depression, stress, anxiety as a result of using these substances, and specifically in people of color. And so I think it would be important for us to do what we can to make them more available, and even better if they can be used with a mental health clinician who's trained in their use. You're going to have much better outcomes, much safer outcomes. And so that's the point I really wanted to make today.
Thank you so much. I believe we have questions from State Representative Ann Hughes.
Hey, thank you so much. Is the University of Ottawa allowing trained mental health clinic use of psilocybin?
Well, I mean, that would be that would have to be as a research study, and it would have to be approved by Health Canada for that to happen. But there are many studies going on in Canada using psilocybin.
I'm particularly interested in how trained mental health clinicians can get that kind of training.
Oh, great question.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you asked, actually, because there are many different training programs going on throughout the US and other places. But actually here at the University of Ottawa, we have started a formal training process. So we have 2 micro programs, which consist of 3 graduate courses that students can take in psychedelic science or psychedelics and spirituality. And we are launching a master's program in psychedelic science, as well as a certificate program for clinicians, so that they will have that experience and training that they need to be able to offer psychedelics safely as part of their clinical practice.
Thanks so much.
Are there any other questions for Dr. Williams? Seeing none, thank you so much, Dr. Williams. We appreciate your time and all of your amazing work and being a fellow UConn Husky.
Thank you.
That's right. All right. So next, I believe we have Jared Moffitt that will be explaining a little bit about the ballot measure that is happening in Massachusetts. Do we have Jared with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, there we go. Thank you so much, Mr. Moffitt. You have the floor.
Awesome. Well, just want to reiterate, thanks to you, Jason, the other organizers, and all the legislators for holding this. I think it's a really important topic, and I commend you for all looking into it. So my name is Jared Moffitt. I work for New Approach Advocacy Fund, which is a national policy organization. I'm the policy director, and I'm involved in several different states to support efforts to expand legal access to natural psychedelics and psychedelics generally. One thing I just want to say at the outset is, I think philosophically that, we seem to all share, I think a lot of the panelists here today share the sense that the current status quo of, criminalizing access to these substances does not serve any public interest, any public safety or public health interests. And so I think that's an important starting point for all these discussions that, they hold promise for helping a lot of folks. And we're not really achieving any goal that's worthwhile by keeping them stigmatized under these criminal laws. So as Jason mentioned, I'm helpful and assisting a campaign in Massachusetts right now, a ballot initiative effort. It's a committee called the Massachusetts for Mental Health Options. And I'll say a little bit about the policy and sort of the context there. So the proposal that's moving forward is an initiative to create a model similar to Colorado's law that was passed in 2022. So there is a decriminalization component that removes criminal penalties for the limited personal use, possession, and cultivation of several natural psychedelics, psilocybin, as well as 3 others, ibogaine, DMT, and mescaline. In addition to removing criminal penalties for limited personal use, there is a state-regulated component to establish psychedelic therapy centers. So these, again, this is similar to what Colorado is working to implement and what is happening now in Oregon. And I think, I'm happy to address any, questions about the details of those policies if folks have questions. I just want to say that as we think about moving away from criminalization, I think there is space to allow for multiple modes of access. So we've heard a little bit about the FDA process today, and I'm certainly supportive of increasing access through FDA approval. My understanding, based on conversations with experts sort of involved, is that FDA approval for psilocybin is several years away. And when that does hopefully happen, there will be other challenges that limit access in that model. There may be requirements to have a specific diagnosis to be prescribed psilocybin. There may be challenges with insurance coverage. Those are all things that folks are certainly thinking about and working on. But I want to just put forward the idea that not everyone who could benefit from psilocybin will necessarily have access through FDA approval. So I think that's an important route to pursue, but it's not the only one. And that's why over the last few years, we've seen a lot of interest at the state level for creating programs for access within the states. And so that's what I primarily focus on. The Massachusetts initiative is really, as folks have said earlier, the latest and best, I think, iteration of these types of policies. So again, there's the decriminalization component and then regulatory access. And I think that removing criminal penalties, again, is just the right thing to do. It's a harm reduction technique and policy to, again, remove the criminal stigma, to encourage community education, to encourage open dialogue, to encourage people to have conversations without fear of punishment. I see setting up a system of regulated access under the supervision of trained facilitators as similarly a harm reduction sort of effort. So the program that's proposed in Massachusetts would establish an advisory board and a regulatory commission to develop licensing, training, and regulations and rules for the production of psychedelics, as well as the administration with trained facilitators. And so I think that having that type of model where there is an access point with someone who is sitting with the person, who is there to support the person, who is there to prepare the person for the experience, is a really important component to make sure we're developing. I think we heard earlier from Dr. Grinspoon that it's not just about the substance in terms of increasing the odds of a beneficial outcome. It's also about the therapeutic support and having someone there who's able to assist the person and take advantage of what the opportunities that the substance can create. And so having this model, I think, of a regulated program where there's facilitated access, I think is going to be a way for a lot of folks who may not be comfortable seeking out substances in sort of an underground or decriminalized context. I think that's why it's important to set up these systems. It will also create a platform for experts to come together and to build education around what the right protocols are. And so I think that having both of these systems available is helpful. And, you know, with Massachusetts, I've heard the question come up of whether, you know, decriminalization should come first. Again, in Massachusetts, both are going to be on the table. And so I think that's worth considering, right? Having multiple paths of access. Last thing I just want to touch on is, I don't know that anyone's covered this quite yet, but public opinion is very favorable to these types of proposals. We saw a national poll come out of Berkeley last year that found about 60% of voters across the country are in favor of establishing some type of legal framework for accessing psychedelics, especially in a regulated context where there's some safeguards and oversight. And we see similar numbers, actually upwards of 60% in Massachusetts for this type of proposal. And so obviously there's a whole campaign that'll be coming up in this year, and we'll see sort of, you know, what the outcome is. But there's a starting point of support, because people see that the existing tools that we have for mental well-being and helping folks who are struggling, those tools work for some people, but they're not working for a lot of people. And so there is a strong demand among the public to explore and allow access to these relatively safe substances that have been used for, you know, for many, many years. So I'll conclude there, and happy to take any questions that folks have about either Massachusetts or sort of the broader policy discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Moffat. I definitely have a couple of questions myself, but is there any questions from the folks in the room?
Thank you, and thank you for that testimony. This is Representative Porter, and I am really in a learning mode. Happy to be here because I've been asked several questions that I cannot answer as of yet. And my question to you, something that you said that struck a chord, you said relatively safe. Can you speak? And I've heard a lot about the pros. Can we talk a little bit about the cons, what they are, especially around concerns that people have with young people and what we've experienced with the legalization of cannabis? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And just to be clear, the policy in Massachusetts is for adults 21 and older. And most of the proposals, the vast majority of proposals that are being considered in legislatures around the country are for adults 21 and older. Psychedelics are not without risk. There can be adverse outcomes. People can have destabilizing experiences. And that is why I think it's really important that we are also talking about education and therapeutic support. Now, when I said relatively safe, what I meant by that is that relative to many other substances used, alcohol, prescription drugs, psychedelics have a very low risk profile. As we've heard others testify, there is a low risk, actually virtually no risk of addiction. The overdose potential is basically non-existent. So from a physiological standpoint, there is very little risk there. There is, however, some risk around the psychological impact. And again, that's why these, I believe, should be used very carefully and with support. And so I think that can happen within a decriminalized context. I think we actually encourage and promote more community organizations to emerge and provide their support systems for people and provide education. And again, I think regulated programs also build that type of infrastructure. What we're doing now by keeping these substances criminalized, I think is the worst possible policy, because it discourages open communication. It doesn't deter people from using if they want to. They simply go underground, and they're, again, they have fear. If they have an adverse outcome, they're in fear of punishment if they were to call emergency services or to talk to their healthcare provider, because they're worried about what the consequences could be. So there are risks here, but it's important that we also acknowledge that people are using these substances now. They're seeking them out, and so creating a better environment for education and, again, therapeutic support to help folks reach the benefits as opposed to a bad outcome. I think that's what all of us here are today talking about.
Thank you for that. Because I was talking to a colleague on my way in, and that was part of the conversation. And that was something that I pointed out. I'm curious to know how this relates to prescription drugs, because we know we have side effects. And in some instances, when I listen to the side effects, I'm like, why would I want to take that? You mentioned two more things, right? You touched on the psychedelic impact. If you could just expound on that a little bit for me, and talk a little bit about the checks and balances. What are we looking to put into policy that would help to give people more confidence in making sure that it's 21 and older, and that kids are not going to have access to this? I'm liking the idea of what you talked about when you said, the supports, right? The mental health supports, the professional supports, making sure that there's education around this. And I do believe that even under 21 needs to be educated, although they wouldn't have access to it. They need to have a full understanding of how it works and what the outcomes are, right? This psychedelic versus a medical prescription, because that's the thing that has me really curious about this, because I'm sorry, a lot of medications just aren't doing the job. And this seems to be something that is working for people who have lived experience with it, which I do not. So that's the point of my questions. And I do appreciate you delving a little deeper for me. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, absolutely. I think these are really, really important questions. So there's a lot of testimony that you may hear as this conversation unfolds, or that you've already heard. There are lots of folks who are saying something similar, that they've tried other prescription drugs, they've tried the sort of existing menu of options out there, and for a lot of folks, those things aren't working. As you mentioned, a lot of the prescription drugs have a ton of side effects that can sometimes make the situation worse for people. And so there are veterans around the country, there are first responders, there are people who are confronting the end of life, a terminal diagnosis, who haven't found any other existing treatment to be effective. But some of them have tried psychedelics and found that it was a game changer, that it was something that was transformative. And that's why there's so much interest in pursuing this. And so I'm not the right person to sort of explain the scientific basis, but I will say that, one analogy that has stuck with me is a clinical researcher discussed how psychedelics are sort of like fertilizer for your brain. They're something that can increase neuroplasticity, increase connections, and in doing that, help you move past some negative thought patterns that may be developed and sort of put people into a rut, into a state of depression. Now, fertilizer doesn't necessarily produce good things. You can grow any sorts of things from those new connections. And that's why having education support so that people are using psychedelics in a context that's going to promote beneficial outcomes is so important. And so I think that what we've seen with, cannabis legalization, speaking directly to your question about youth access, I've been an advocate for drug policy reform broadly, and I've been really happy to see that by regulating and legalizing cannabis, we have not seen an increase in cannabis use among teenagers, as many opponents said that we would. And I think that's because when you increase honest education and honest dialogue, and you set up regulatory systems that create these systems for adult use that distinguish and say it's not appropriate for youth to use these, I think that's the right message to send. And we've seen that work effectively with cannabis. I think we can have a similar conversation about psychedelic substances, that these are something that is appropriate for adults, but not children. And so I think what we're trying to do is, by having a policy discussion and having sort of a broader societal discussion that includes researchers, that includes experts, we can have a more nuanced conversation. These are not, as others have noted, this is not a panacea. This is not a magic bullet solution to our mental health crisis, but it is another tool that, if we use it appropriately and if we put it in the right context and if we do public education, it can be tremendously helpful for lots of people. And so I think, again, that's what we're all trying to do. That's why there's so many different perspectives and experts here, because it is complicated, but at the end of the day, I think we all share similar goals in terms of where we're headed.
And I think we're going to have to go to the next speaker soon here. But just quickly, when it comes to youth education, we do have a fantastic organization that myself and Jared are both alumni of, Students for Sensible Drug Policy. We actually have SSDP at University of New Haven in the room. So shout out SSDP for being here to help us deal with any types of family or student education. And of course, it should happen much before 21. The discussion of when and how we do youth education on drugs is a very important part of this process. It's not just criminalization, but how do we explain what is changing to everyone and at what age is the appropriate age. But I do want to shift the conversation slightly to the discussion on home cultivation of psychedelic mushrooms, because it's my understanding that in Massachusetts, it does include a provision for home cultivation. Is that true? Could you explain a little bit about what the parameters are for that? And has there, what was the motivation to include that in your bill?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, the Massachusetts ballot initiative that, by the way, I should say, is in the process. It's now within the state legislature. There was a signature drive last year, and there's more to do, but it's moving forward in the process. There is a home cultivation component. It's limited. So essentially, a person in their home residence, if they're an adult 21 and older, can cultivate within a limited space, basically the size of a small room, is what you're allowed to do. And part of that is because there's other plant psychedelics included. And so some of those take up more space than just mushrooms. But the whole point is that this has to happen within a home residence. And I should be very clear that the Massachusetts initiative does not allow for sales, any type of commercialization, retail store. So you can't, grow mushrooms in your house and then sell them like a commodity. It's only for personal use. You can use it for yourself. You can share it with others without remuneration. So the motivation for including that, again, is because having and maintaining criminal penalties for the personal use of psychedelics doesn't serve any public good. And by removing those criminal penalties, we can have more honesty, we can remove the stigma, and encourage people to be more open. And, if you remove criminal penalties for the personal use and possession of something, it sort of behooves you to think about where the person is going to access that from. And so removing criminal penalties is a way to give people a way to legally access these substances without allowing for sales and sort of this, unregulated market to proliferate. So that was the motivation there, is remove criminal penalties, give people a legal way to produce a limited amount for themselves and to share with others.
Thank you so much for that. And we're going to move along to our next speaker in the interest of time. So thank you, Mr. Moffitt, for your work. We look forward to bringing some Connecticut nutmeggers up to Massachusetts to help you get the job done. So next, we are going to move to Kevin Matthews. Is Kevin Matthews available?
I'm here.
Hey, there we go. All right. Thank you,
Yes.
sir. Mr. Matthews, take it away. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. First of all, it's an honor to be here today. Representative Michelle, other lawmakers in the room, Jason, Victor, Sam, thank you all so much for the invitation and for inviting me today. You know, we are in such an incredible cultural moment with these naturally occurring psychedelic medicines. And I think it's just a great privilege to be able to have this conversation with so many esteemed individuals and friends and colleagues and other folks who are really taking this issue very seriously and considering the impact. For myself, I was the campaign manager for the historic Denver Psilocybin Initiative that Ms. Barnes mentioned earlier, where Denver was the first city in the US to decriminalize the personal use, possession, and cultivation of psilocybin mushrooms back in May 2019. I also was the co-chief proponent and the coalition director for the Natural Medicine Health Act that was passed by Colorado voters back in November of 2022 that, as was mentioned earlier, both created a state-regulated access program starting with psilocybin, where individuals would be able to access licensed psilocybin services at healing centers by trained and licensed psilocybin facilitators. And what was mentioned earlier is that the Natural Medicine Health Act also decriminalized the personal use and possession and cultivation, transfer, transportation, gifting, and sharing of various what we called in Colorado natural medicines, DMT, mescaline, psilocybin, and psilocin. We also decriminalized ibogaine. However, ibogaine currently cannot be shared. And I also currently serve as the president of the Denver Psilocybin Mushroom Policy Review Panel, where I work with our district attorney, members of law enforcement, other advocates, mental health and medical professionals, and attorneys. And the role of the Denver Psilocybin Mushroom Policy Review Panel is to make public health, public safety, and public policy recommendations to the Denver City Council, and in some cases, the city's administration. And I also consult with folks across the entire ecosystem with strategic consulting in various areas across the country. And I also train advocates on how to pass, how to organize with local policy reform and work to change these laws locally. And I think there's so much that was already discussed that I wanted to share today. And so I think the focus of what I'd like to talk about really is around public health and public safety. And back in November of 2021, our panel submitted our comprehensive report to the Denver City Council. And in that report, which covered a lot of things, the history of psilocybin mushrooms, enforcement, adverse events that may have occurred. The biggest thing that we discovered as a result of drafting that document and then delivering it to the city and county of Denver is that at that time, in the nearly 2 years since we decriminalized psilocybin in Denver, there were no significant public health or public safety impacts. And so the decriminalization of psilocybin did not present any significant issues in terms of health or safety. And I think arguably in the almost 4.5 years now since we passed our local measure in Denver, that remains the same. Considering all of the other jurisdictions across the country, as was mentioned earlier, nearly 24 cities that have decriminalized entheogens, I don't think that we're seeing a trend in terms of any risk to public health and safety. And then in the last 15 months since we passed our ballot measure here in Colorado with our decriminalization component, we also haven't seen any significant public health or safety risks. And I think it's really important to have a discussion around why decriminalization is really critical to the policy reform landscape. When we were advocating in Denver back in 2019, So much of our campaign was absolutely supported and supported by and focused on the potential medical benefits or therapeutic benefits of psilocybin mushrooms, but really from an enforcement perspective, considering their safety profile, which has been discussed earlier, we really emphasize that no one deserves to face severe criminal penalties or jail time or other life-altering circumstances with law enforcement for trying to use these medicines, these substances to heal. And when we're considering decriminalization, I think it's, as Mr. Moffat shared earlier, we need to really recognize that, that the trend across the country for the past 5 years when it comes to decriminalization really has been focused on no limits on personal possession and allowing for cultivation, cultivation at home for personal use. And I think that as Jason also mentioned earlier, if we're decriminalizing personal use, but still criminalizing cultivation, it's really difficult to kind of make the distinction of we have to ask the question, where is a person actually receiving their psilocybin or their mushrooms? And why is it that a person is able to legally possess these substances, but the individuals who may be cultivating them are further criminalized? And when we're talking about limits as well, I think that limits on personal use in some cases may provide a lot more incentive for law enforcement to make arrests, especially in marginalized communities of color, folks who've been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs or disproportionately impacted by the healthcare system. The kind of ethos across a lot of the grassroots organizing efforts, and from what we've seen, in the state of Colorado and also possibly in Massachusetts this year, is that from an enforcement perspective, it's important that we allow individuals to kind of self-determine the way that they work with these medicines. And I think considering that because we haven't seen any significant public health or safety issues arise in the past 5 years or so with all this policy reform, that it's important that folks really have the freedom and the choice to work with these medicines in the way that works for them. For some people, that may look like working with their
Wrap
local
up your comments quickly.
Yep, working with their local community practitioner, or also, here in Colorado, looking at regulated access models. To me, this is about access and choice, and it'll be exciting to see, how Connecticut decides to move forward. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. It's very much exciting to see how Connecticut's going to move forward. I do have one question that's specifically about the arrests and the impact of law enforcement priority policies. Did you see in Denver or Colorado writ large, was there a significant number of psychedelic arrests that were made prior to the decrim? And was there a reduction after the ballot initiative passed? And if
That's
so,
a great question. And yeah, thank you for that, Jason. So historically, arrests in Denver for psilocybin accounted for about 1% of total arrests related to drug offenses. A majority of those arrests included other illicit substances beyond psilocybin. And in the time since decriminalization, while there have been some arrests regarding psilocybin in Denver, most, if not all of them, were dismissed by our district attorney. And then in the, again, 15 months since we passed our ballot initiative in Colorado, there have been a few arrests, and to my knowledge, most of those have been dismissed.
but you would say that there definitely was a reduction in total arrests afterwards.
Absolutely. If not a reduction in arrests, a reduction in actual prosecution.
Fair, and important distinction. Okay, thank you so much. In the interest of time, we're going to move on to our next speaker. Thank you, Mr. Matthews, for your work and for your ongoing support of all of our work here in Connecticut.
Of course.
Thank you. And so I believe our next speaker is Larry Norris of Decrim Nature. Is Larry available?
Everybody, yes.
Hey, there we go. Thank you so
Nice to see you,
much.
Jason.
Yeah, it's good to see you. It's always a pleasure, and good to see you appearing in this wonderful room here in Connecticut. Thank you for your time, and you have the floor.
Great. Thank you very much, Phil. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invite and the time to discuss this really important issue. My name is Dr. Larry Norris. I'm the co-founder of Entheogenic Research, Integration, and Education, which is an organization providing integration and education support for psychedelics in the San Francisco Bay Area. We've been around for about a decade now. I also co-founded Decriminalized Nature, which a lot of people have talked about in passing this evening, or this morning, I should say. That began in Oakland, California in late 2018, and we're helping to steward a movement that has now blossomed to 27 cities, passing similar policy nationwide. The most recent happening last night in Ypsilanti, Michigan, which is the sister city to Ann Arbor, and congratulations to them. We aim to have about 10 more cities to pass by the end of this year. So it's a pretty impressive movement. I think there's going to that keeps rolling that momentum. I think one thing that we really want to talk about, which I've been appreciating listening to over the course of this conversation, is sort of the nuance between decriminalization and legalization. What is the difference there? Decriminalization is really saying like, hey, we have better things to do with our resources. We don't want to consider our fellow human beings criminals. Let's just remove those criminal penalties, right? And legalization is a whole different structure. You're talking about regulations and testing and taxes and licenses and business, like all the things that come with that. That's a lot of work to do, right? But we don't need to really, start off with that, and sometimes another thing too to consider is that, a lot of people say, I've heard from a group called Symposia, they talk about this idea that legalization is basically prohibition light, meaning anyone that doesn't follow these state imposed guidelines are still considered criminals. But this is really simple. Make it really easy on everybody. You just create policy that stops arresting people. It's cost effective, it's the right thing to do, and that's what I'm here to advocate for, is for the removal of criminal penalties for plants and mushrooms that grow out of the ground, and giving them a way to help find relief that they need from entheogens. And we can do that today. We just stop criminalizing people. It's super easy. Two other issues I'll talk about in this talk today, besides the decriminalization legalization framework, is about accessibility and equitable access. We cannot really talk about accessibility and equitable access unless we're talking about decriminalizing home cultivation, community-based practice, and sharing, which has already been mentioned quite a few times tonight. And then the third thing I'll talk about is on limitations and fines. I'm not sure why this is happening, in a lot of different state legislatures. You never really hear this on the city level, but there's this need to continue to penalize people, and it's out of habit. We don't need to do that. We don't need to give somebody a fine for doing this thing because it's been criminalized before. We don't need to penalize somebody and say, okay, well, at this limit amount, you need to go to jail. We can just remove those criminal penalties. We can create our own reality. That's what legislators do, right? So this is your opportunity to really take a stand on this issue. It's been all about 5 years since the resolution was passed in Oakland, which was deprioritizing and defunding investigation, persecution, arrests for the use, possession, cultivation, and sharing amongst community. And again, as I mentioned, those last two elements are critical as we talk about an equitable and accessible approach to these ancient sacred mushrooms. And just a reminder, we are talking about mushrooms that grow from the ground and can be easily cultivated by the individual. That's really important. What better way to engage with one's own healing process than being able to also grow their own mushrooms? Sometimes mushrooms growing can be abundant, and when we have abundance, we naturally want to share with our friends and community. And what's important about this is we're rebuilding community and culture around these issues. So there are many variables in healing, and one that's often not spoken about is the benefits that come from being empowered to engage in one's own healing process and not be dependent upon a therapist or lean upon a doctor. In culturally relevant settings, sitting by a friend or community member can be really powerful healing space, one that may not be seen by going to the unknown facilitator who doesn't deeply understand the nuances of one's life, story, or experiences. By being able to grow one's own mushrooms or share them in community, we are creating the world we wish to see, one of connection, one of accountability, one of sharing and educating, and most importantly, one without barriers to access. So what do barriers to access look like? We don't have to look too far. While we're happy all policy that's going on across the US, unfortunately, the model we find in Oregon is expensive and inaccessible for most. As you might have heard, some of the costs, for the individual costing anywhere from $3,500 to $10,000 for an experience. These are out-of-pocket, uninsured expenses for something that grows abundantly in Oregon for free out of the ground everywhere. In addition, this model, as Martin Mason was saying earlier, is losing money and will cost the taxpayer dollars to keep it afloat, being nowhere near sustainable in the time that it's come across. As mentioned by Ishmael earlier, there were about 700 people that went through the Oregon program last year. However, I bet tens of thousands of people had an experience outside of that model. And despite their best intentions, regulations often lead to high costs, and the more that are added, the more expensive this gets. The idea that these experiences are required to be so expensive is absurd. This could be an easy fix. Allow for home growing and community-based sharing. Sadly, in Oregon, growing mushrooms and sharing mushrooms is still a felony, thereby forcing this new approach where people have to pay thousands of dollars for a single experience or not have any at all. Believe it or not, access to consciousness is a human right, not a pay-to-play scheme. So what are some other models that work for community-based healing? And those models are working right now. What we see, as mentioned earlier, the decriminalization side of Colorado seems to be working. There's some amazing, innovative things that are going on in the community. They're doing gifting and sharing of mushrooms and having educational events, all the kind of things that you're hoping to see come out of this, as well as the 27 different cities that have deprioritized nationwide, all coming together in community, building this local infrastructure, connecting with each other. So why does this work? Because they are leaning on the underground and legacy communities who have been doing this work for a long time. It is allowing them to come above ground and teach others, educate, and practice risk reduction. The wisest and most experienced can steward the movement without any additional training. The biggest thing we can do today is to stop arresting people for doing what they're already doing and let the legacy community who are knowledgeable and have many, many years of experience begin to lead the way. This is why community-based practice, sharing, and home grow is so important. Other considerations I want to talk about today.
You can wrap up your comments quickly, please.
Great. The previous bill had a very small amount of the limits. And I ask for you, is that really the reason? Was there really a need to create these limitations? As was mentioned earlier, this only incentivizes search and seizure. And when we set limits, we're really saying, when can we arrest you next? This is the type of policy we want to get behind. I can have 10,000 gallons of whiskey or 2 tons of tobacco in my basement and no one will say anything. I can have 300 pounds of poisonous mushrooms and I would not be breaking any laws. So is setting limits really a safety issue, or is there something else going on? Is the concern really around sales? And continue to make unregulated sales illegal, but let's not recreate the Minority Report where we criminalize people for an amount we judge to be too large under the guise that someday in the future they may sell it. Someone was speaking earlier about the risk related to some of these substances, and while there might be some risks, it's no more so than what we take, risks we take for granted every day. More people have died taking selfies than all these substances combined. Could you imagine what would happen if we decided to criminalize taking selfies because of the risk? It would be chaos. Recently, we heard in the news of a pilot that was, taking a plane down on mushrooms, but that was sort of the media leveraging fear and burying.
If you could wrap up your comments quickly, that would be appreciated.
Okay, great. I thought I had 10 minutes here. Okay. So yeah, basically what I'm saying is that we really want to be focusing on decriminalization and not a regulatory model. Let's decriminalize first, as is mentioned by a variety of people, and make sure that we can move this policy forward and trust and respect our individual human beings and citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to make sure we have time for questions. Does anyone have a question?
So just to clarify, have like an approach of saying this amount of psychedelics is allowed and this is not, maybe more harmful than helpful?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to incentivize, as Kevin was saying a minute ago, it's going to incentivize, certain laws being, leveraged on certain people, marginalized communities, things of that nature. There hasn't been any issues. None of the cities and any of the places have any kind of limitations. That's not been a problem. This idea that people are going to grow, tons and tons and tons of mushrooms and do something horrible with them, it never happens. So I would say, yeah, I mean, why limit? Once you start putting limits on things, then you start sort of changing our relationship to nature, changing our relationship to our healing process. You start sort of thinking about it in a commodification mindset instead of just thinking about it as like, sometimes you might grow something and one morning you wake up and you're a criminal and the night before you weren't, just because nature is abundant. So I think putting limitations on things can be a problem. Yeah.
And my question is just quickly, I know Decrim Nature is very well versed in the grow, gather, gift model. We've talked a lot about gifting and growing, but could you elaborate a little bit on why gather is part of that and what that looks like, why you think that should be protected?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, gather comes in kind of 2 levels. A lot of people talk about gather. It's kind of become gathering community, come together, have culturally relevant settings and people to understand your story, to be able to sit with you, to be able to help you heal, to be able to help you with your process, to learn about the experiences. But I think the initial meaning of gather was also the fact that these, like in Oregon, grow abundantly in the ground. So people can gather them, they can go mushroom foraging and that type of thing. Obviously, of course, you want to make sure that you're well aware of the mushrooms that are out there, but But that would be the other side of it. So gather both in community and also gather in that these are nature's abundant gifts for us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Norris. We're going to move on to our next speaker, and I believe it is Mark Guckel. Is Mark available?
You're muted.
I don't even have this off yet. Okay. Hey, it's really great to be here today. I'm very honored and humbled to be amongst some of the other folks who've spoken today. I actually sat with Mason Marks on the Psychedelic Bar Association when I was a member. But what I can say is my experience is a little bit different than everybody else because I'm not a doctor. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a licensed professional. I'm a person with lived experience, which is to say that for the better part of my life, I struggled with substance use, primarily crack cocaine and heroin. And like I tried everything to stop detoxes, rehabs, going to meetings. I actually had one of my stories featured in Alcoholics Anonymous Grapevine magazine. And yet I could only get a year or two. And I would invariably go out and pick up for reasons that I didn't understand. And after the loss of my dad, I inherited a significant amount of money and ended up picking up. And I was in my bathroom smoking $3,000 worth of crack every single day when I found a video online about psychedelic medicines. And I was dying. My life was pretty much over with, so I was desperate and willing to try anything. And so I turned to ibogaine and ayahuasca. And where my story gets to be interesting is that's what helped me to stop using. But it was very cost restrictive to participate in ayahuasca ceremonies. Sometimes it was very taxing time wise. And here in Florida, mushrooms grow. Like I live in an area of the state where one side of the street is orchards and the other side are pastures. And I was a caretaker for my mom. I used to drive to state parks every day and I kept seeing these pastures and I decided I'd chance it and hop a fence. And I began to forage every day, not just for a few mushrooms, but for a lot, right? There are 11,000 named species of mushrooms, 200 of them that contain psilocybin. Most are in the Psilocybe genus, and almost like they just grow like wildfire here. So I became an avid lover. And now, when I say all this, I'm also a Connecticut Community for Addiction recovery coach professional and curriculum facilitator. I've been a coach since 2013. I did my additional trainings. It became an RCP in 2021. This time last year, I was at their national conference presenting on psychedelic medicines and how they're impacting people on recovery. I was also a keynote speaker, a lot of it based on lived experience, but also in a drive to show a whole different group of people about something that they always consider to be drugs. Because what I'd like to reflect to you is what you're hearing today. We're not dealing with drugs, we're dealing with medicines, right? And if we actually knew what we do today about psilocybin, the real question becomes is would we have ever made it illegal in the first place? Because it helps with a wide variety of conditions. There's some research that's getting ready to be a study that's getting ready to be released from the University of Alabama, Birmingham, where they've worked with people with cocaine use disorder and psilocybin. And the numbers are going to be just as encouraging as the ones that they did with smoking, that they did with alcohol. So what we're looking at here is a real shift in the way that we help people, right? Now, what I can say is I've done a lot of national podcasts. I've done several, and I'm reluctant to do them because I get anywhere between 7 and 50 messages a day with people asking for help. You have a lot of desperate people out there that are looking for access to these medicines. And honestly, some of them are very readily available online. Like if you Google microdoses for sale, you can buy chocolate bars. And while I know that's apples to oranges, it's federal, with the mail. for people to have it in their possession is something that's going to happen, you know. And I'd like to encourage you to look at these. You know, they're not addictive. They have very few side effects. And, short of setting up a regulatory model, this is something that you could do today. And to close out, I'd like to invite you. I'll be offering a webinar through CCAR, the Connecticut Community for Addiction Recovery, on Tuesday. It's on psilocybin and psychedelic assisted recovery. And I'd absolutely love to have you there. I'm sure that you'll come away enriched. If you had a hard time making a decision from what was said today, you certainly won't after sitting with me and checking out what I've got to say.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions for Mark?
Yes, I'm just going to make a comment. Thank you, Victor, and thank you for taking the hosting mic. Thank you, Mr. Guckle. I just wanted to just make a quick comment and thank you for bringing up the addiction recovery aspect of it, which is extremely important for your testimony of your own experience. Thank you.
Very honored to be here. And if I can ever be supportive in any way, you're always welcome to reach out. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for your open-mindedness. It'll make a difference.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, we're going to quickly take over. I know it's been long. Please get up and stretch, get water, use the bathroom. Cafeterias across the hall, please use that. So before I actually take over, it's my turn. Okay. Hello, my name is Victor Constanza. I'm the founder and lead organizer of Connecticut for Accessible Psychedelic Medicine. I currently study drug and alcohol recovery counseling at Gateway Community College with aspirations of being a psychiatrist. And I do have to be honest, I do not think I would be here, both with being alive and even with the event we are having today. Reason I say this is because I suffer from PTSD, borderline personality disorder, and alcohol use disorder. I have been suffering with mental health disorder since I was 14. The life I had was chaotic. The emotional and social harm I've inflicted to myself and others have been immense. I put my personal and professional relationships through hell, especially for my family. I live with thoughts of ending my life for years and have attempted to do so a few times. I had very little regard for my consequences. My self-hatred controlled every aspect of my life. I took my recovery very seriously after a horrible DUI accident in August of 2021. It was a stupid mistake, and thankfully no one got hurt in any way. Now, mind you, I've attempted to get help several times. I went through many therapists, counselors, and psychiatrists, and nothing helped. The amount of intensive outpatient programs, antidepressants, and Vivitrol, which is a medical assisted treatment for alcohol cravings, that I went through did not help. Despite me being in recovery, I was not happy where my life was. I was still the same person. I lost everything and did not know what to do. I was still suffering with intense PTSD symptoms that were debilitating. Every day was the same to me and I was hopeless. I was thinking that I should just go back to my old lifestyle to escape the pain. I really did not see the point in getting better. Again, none of my treatments were working, and at this point, this is back in July last year, I was at the point of a full relapse. I was willing to do anything, however, I was reminded about psilocybin. Now, despite my long history of alcohol, anything more than cannabis was scary to me. But because of the mental health, of the mental pain, I was willing to try anything. I did my research on taking a macro dose. The trip itself was something I've never experienced. It was very intense, but I really cannot explain what happened. And however, when you look at research, everyone's experience is different. But after one trip, I felt instant release. And to this day, my alcohol cravings are at zero. My depressional symptoms are near zero. My suicidality is at zero. My impulsivity is at near zero. But the biggest breakthrough was that it made me forgive myself. Instead of having a reason to continue with my life, it gave me the feeling of that reason. It made me stop the self-hate, which is something I can never do. It made me change as a person and for the better, and I finally feel free. I now have the motivation to keep going with my life and actually take the lessons of the past to improve myself. Something I can never do in my life is to finish any professional or personal goals. And with psilocybin, I want to finish the goal of being a doctor. I do want to say that this is not a cure. There's not much evidence on its effects on borderline personality disorder. I still do suffer from a lot, but it's very much, life is easier to handle. These effects of mine only happen due to intention. There are many folks who take psilocybin without it and will stay the same. They wouldn't have the therapeutic effect. Intention is very, very well documented as a reason why people feel better. I am the most mentally stable in my life thanks to psilocybin, and I will say that for the rest of my life. Now, after a few trips, I told myself, why aren't more people talking about this? We live in a society after COVID where we have seen an immense increase in mental health diagnosis, especially with anxiety, depression, PTSD, and substance use disorders. I ended up making CAPM with the goal of legalizing psychedelic assisted treatments and decriminalizing psilocybin use. Now, with decriminalization, should a person like myself be arrested for what I did? You know, I'm a huge troublemaker for a very long time, and for once I did something good, and I believe I should not be arrested. Even though psychedelic assisted treatments are being heavily researched and most likely will be legalized from the FDA, they are still very expensive. For example, there are reports of MDMA treatments, another psychedelic, that are $11,000 and up. States like Oregon and who legalized psychedelic treatments and decriminalized it are seeing many folks who could not afford any of it. No one will be able to afford it despite upcoming federal approval. It will only help those with privilege, which are predominantly upper middle class folks and or are also white. With that, psilocybin has a very low level of harm, even less than cannabis. Psilocybin also has a very low addictive liability rate, and historically has been used by indigenous communities for thousands of years. Despite its medical factor, you do not need to have a mental health disorder to really see its helpfulness. Microdosing is a very popular way to take psilocybin, and one does not trip from it. Overall, it improves creativity, mood, empathy, and mindfulness. Now, when it comes to an ideal bill, psilocybin is not cannabis. There are a lot of factors in it that are based around community due to its connection to the indigenous folks who have used it. I am indigenous myself. My lineage comes from the Xinca tribe, who are from Guatemala. The way it was consumed is if someone needed help, psilocybin was given. There were no costs and sometimes taken in groups. And community what has been the medicine for thousands of years. Besides having a realistic amount to hold, which is way more than the previous decriminalization bill from last year, the bill must include facilitator rights, requirements, trainings, and protections, which is also known as trip sitting. Only when taking more than a microdose, a facilitator or trip sitter should be present, and this is where the community factor is important for harm reduction reasons and to its respect to indigenous roots. Along with this, facilitators do not require a degree as it is not therapy. The facilitator is there to make sure that people are comfortable and feel safe when going on a trip. These facilitator rights must also include those who want to take it in a group. The bill should also include gifting protections to embrace those community factors. Along with this, the bill should provide protections for those who would like to grow it at home. States like Colorado and the upcoming Massachusetts ballot measure include all of what I said as part of the language of their bills. Again, ask yourselves, should people be arrested for using psilocybin when the research shows how harmful it is and the huge benefits it can provide for someone? Decriminalization is the first step here in a growing psychedelic movement, and I hope a comprehensive bill passes so it can benefit anyone, especially for people like myself. Thank you. Any questions? No. Okay. Next one. Kamora Harrington.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Hello, beautiful humans. My name is Kamora Leela Harrington. I am the owner, operator, founder, and visionary of Kamora's Cultural Corner, and I have been working with human beings in various professional capacities for the last 30 years. And before I get started, I want to talk about, as we were talking about decriminalization, I want to talk about being stifled, because for a good 20 years, I worked with young people such as Victor. And during that time, many of those young people were self-medicating. And many of those young people were smoking weed, and many of those folks were figuring out how to trip. And I did not have the ability in my professional capacity to have open and honest conversations with them that could have led towards healing. So because of the way that we were structured, I had to hurt the human beings in front of me, and I couldn't create those connections that we know are necessary. When Victor was just speaking, I actually had to take a note because I noticed what happened in the room. Victor said, it made me forgive myself. And I looked around the room and I saw collective. And that's where we need to be. So I'm very, very happy that we're here this year. I'm very happy that we're here today. And I'm happy that we're here a month before the session opens. One thing folks have heard me say over and over and over again is that the revolution is in the pause. The revolution is in the pause. The revolution is in the pause. We've seen what happens when people push through legislation, good or bad, when people push it through way too quickly without doing the thought and without taking the time to figure out how this is going to affect everyone. I'm looking around the room. I am very happy to see as many Black and brown faces as I see in here. I don't see as many Black and brown faces as I would like to see. And I want us all to take a moment to consider and think about why that is. Yes, there's access. Yes, there's the ability to take some time off in the middle of the day to be here, but there's also stigma. And for many people in professional capacities who are Black or brown, they aren't safe being in this room and having this conversation because the stigma that will affect them. Now, if those of us who are the professionals have enough stigma that we can't openly have this conversation, what does this do to people who need plant medicine? How does this stifle conversations? I want us really to go back, and I want to thank folks for getting us up in here today, but I want to remind us that we are the land of steady habits. We are Connecticut, which means that we take a really long time to do anything that we need to do that will help anyone. I want us to think about what happened with cannabis. It took a long time. We are here at the beginning, and I'm sorry, I'm Kamar, I'm gonna call them shrooms, okay? So psilocybin, it's a great word. I love that y'all love it. It works so beautifully for me. But I like to talk about shrooms, and I love the conversations that I get to talk to my folks about shrooms because, believe it or not, in the Black community, mental health care has been stigmatized. And there are many of us who don't feel safe or comfortable stepping into spaces where we can start taking care of ourselves. But call it the age of Aquarius, call it the new millennium, call it late stage capitalism, whatever words it is that you want to use, we're at this beautiful turning place. And we're at a place where people are starting to take care of themselves and own taking care of themselves. And shrooms is a wonderful way to have those conversations, and shrooms are a wonderful way. That collective healing that was happening in here when this was happening, that's one of the things that psilocybin brings to us. And as we look at decriminalization, I am incredibly happy with all of the words that I've heard today, right? Legalization is wonderful. Words matter. Words matter a lot. Decriminalization makes a big difference for someone who's tired of watching people who she loves go to jail when they're trying to take ownership of their lives and care for themselves. Legalization sounds great. What's happening today, the revolution is in the pause. The revolution is in the pause. The revolution is the pause. We know that mushrooms address PTSD issues. We know that mushrooms address racial trauma issues. Let's take some time and figure out how to decriminalize this in this state so that we can actually heal ourselves and heal our state. The conversation happening in here today and the way people are talking is what needs to continue happening. I started off by saying that I didn't see enough Black and brown faces in here. I'm very happy with who's here, but I want to remind folks that intersectionality is a thing. And I have sat in wonderful spaces with a whole bunch of folks in this room who don't share all of my identities. But when we can spend some time in the pause and possibly spend some time with some plant medicine, we can figure out how we can care for each other and how we can move forward as a society. So as a person who spends a lot of time making sure and demanding that Black and brown voices are seen and heard and taken into account as we figure out how to heal ourselves and as we figure out how to decriminalize the ways that we live our lives, I have always had to depend, as a person in Connecticut, I've had to depend on white voices. That can be a scary place. I believe that on this issue, y'all white folks are kind of okay. I believe that on this issue, there's a place that if we really look at what we're doing, and if we really look at the positive effects of psilocybin, and if we all practice what we preach as we're practicing and preaching it, we can figure out how to get this done in Connecticut in a way that truly does positively affect all of us. And again, as a person who spends a lot of time studying history, that land of steady habits thing has not served us well. Let's get it right, and let's kind of show the rest of the country that we can take some time to pause. we can make that revolutionary moment. And sometimes moving a little bit slowly isn't because we're scared of the change that Connecticut is so good at being scared of, but it's because we want to make sure that we do this in a way that doesn't leave anyone behind. And I can't wait to have a whole bunch of Black and brown folks sitting up, tripping, understanding, and knowing that this is healing and they don't have to look over their shoulder because no one's going to come and arrest them. Questions?
Thank you, Kimora. Well said, all of it. Any questions for Kimora? Okay, none. Next, and I'm so sorry for butchering your last name because I'm not good with these. Chandra Campanelli. Neil?
It's close.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I am Chandra Campanelli. I am a registered nurse of 17 years. I am a board certified holistic nurse as well as a board certified health and wellness nurse coach. I have worked at the bedside. I have worked in the emergency room, and I have also worked in my capacity as a health and wellness nurse coach through Inspire Integrative. That is the lens that I'm coming through with this testimony. I do want to just jump back and touch on, there was some discussion earlier about mitigating risk through education. And so, right, education is our most powerful weapon. Yet there's a lot of people that are not here today for the simple fact that they risk their licensure, they risk their reputation, they risk their freedom just by providing education. So with that being said, we know that we can increase safety through decriminalization by being able to adequately provide education. So I want to go on and say that for something to be deemed criminal, there should be established evidence that it causes harm. In the case of psilocybin, the propaganda leading to criminalization really disregarded the evidence and contrarily showed it to be safe and in many cases therapeutic. Nevertheless, the fear mongering was incredibly effective. No doubt many of the legislators who are watching or will watch this have arrived here with a foundation built upon that propaganda. So that's really the place that they're coming from. So I think it's really important to note that in the 10,000 years of consumption by humans, there has never been one lethal dose of psilocybin or the mushrooms that contain it. A study of adverse reactions of psilocybin published in the Journal of Psychopharmacology out of Oxford states that out of 9,233 users, 19 reported to the emergency room. Those visits were primarily youth, having used mixed substances and reporting anxiety. The symptoms were short-lived and self-resolving. Here's the important piece. No medical intervention was necessary for symptom relief. All right, made people feel safer, but no medical intervention was necessary. And this finding was actually endorsed by Dr. Roland Griffiths, the highly regarded and recently passed director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Psychedelic Studies, who stated there's never been a single psilocybin study participant who's required emergency care. Even those who experience anxiety or challenges ultimately endorse the experience as having been very meaningful. So at the bedside, when patients find out that I'm a holistic nurse, they tend to be a lot more open with me than they are with their colleagues and peers. And so somewhere around 2019 to 2020, people started telling me that they were microdosing, actually opening up to me and saying this at the bedside. And as you can imagine, it's not an easy thing to say. It's obviously illegal. So when I asked them, have you mentioned this to your provider? They looked at me like I was crazy. So, of course, they don't say that they're using it because it comes with the stigma of criminalization, which also goes hand in hand with discrimination. So if people are unwilling to share with their providers a critical component of a safe way that they are approaching their health care, then in truth, criminalization actually is the doer of harm. So regular people living regular lives being judged as criminals for something that not only doesn't provoke harm, but improves the quality of life. The current research environment surrounding psilocybin has demonstrated efficacy in treating depression, anxiety, smoking cessation, obsessive compulsive disorder, and alcoholism. It shows promise in many more areas, including anorexia, traumatic brain injury, post-concussive disorder, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's. Some of these are really difficult conditions to treat when the symptoms are very debilitating and lower the quality of life. But here's the really biggest piece that I want you to hear, and that is that the benefits are reported widely in the Walking Well. That means those who do not have diagnoses, no conditions, no medical illnesses. These benefits include increases in health-related behaviors. So this is average you and me, all right? Just doing things to make our physical and psycho-emotional health better. It also includes improved mood, increased creativity, and problem solving. Sounds like we could probably use a hand with problem solving. So we have that. And then increased empathy, right? We could use a little bit of that too. So while the healthcare industry is deeply involved in researching and monetizing psilocybin, it would be irresponsible and short-sighted to simply create a medical model or a regulated access model for use without decriminalizing the substance itself. I'll state up front that I do not believe that psilocybin should be controlled and prescribed by the government, medicine, or pharma. For the past 60 years, the substance has been illegal, and thus it's been governed by the individual who decided to break the law. Nevertheless, individuals and communities have not been plagued with mushroom criminality. It's very important to note that not only has psilocybin been shown to be non-habit forming, in fact, it's evidenced to be the strongest tool to date to combat addiction. Average citizens have this information at their fingertips, and they're not waiting for legislators to catch up. They want to stop suffering now, yet the law gets in their way. That doesn't make any sense. All over Connecticut, I've worked with people who have stopped using tobacco, alcohol, and even heroin after using psilocybin. It is breathtaking to me, the success they achieve and the pride they take in that success. But all of that can be easily destroyed with a single felony charge. The system is thus that people who would decrease their chances of becoming violent criminals through addiction, increase their health-related behaviors, be relieved of depression and anxiety, and become more empathetic to the human community are the ones who risk incarceration, and that seems backwards. My ultimate position is legal adult use. This avoids the inequities we are currently seeing on the West Coast, wherein the privileged have access through the medical model. What's most important right now is that people who live otherwise lawful lives are not criminalized for their personal use. That's natural, safe, and oftentimes assists in improving psycho-emotional and physical health. In my role as a health and wellness nurse coach, people who use this substance come to me to discuss their experiences, to discern meaning, and to work through some of the challenges that led them to utilize psilocybin. I can tell you emphatically across the board, these people are decreasing their use of addictive, harmful substances. They are experiencing fewer symptoms of anxiety. Their relationships with themselves, with their families, with their friends, with their communities are improving. They are looking at challenges with expanded perspective and greater empathy. Who this state chooses to criminalize is a choice. The consequence of that is how society is shaped. This year, 2024, Connecticut legislators absolutely must decriminalize psilocybin. Show the rest of the country that no, we're not going to wait in the shadows to see what the West Coast does or wait for Massachusetts. We know they're on their way. The good, hardworking, health-seeking people of Connecticut do not belong imprisoned for using a substance that has no direct link to societal harm, demonstrated over the course of millennia. I challenge our legislators to be bold, to be trailblazers, set the tone that suggests that Connecticut wants the best quality of life for its citizens and is willing to take steps to make that happen.
Thank you, Chandra. Any
Thank you.
questions?
I was just going to make a comment that I'm certainly a legislator in favor of decriminalizing this year. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Up next, can I please have Lisa Capitani?
Very good. Thank you. Hi, yes, I am Lisa Capitani. I am also a registered nurse here in Connecticut. I live in Newtown. My life's work in healthcare took an unexpected turn in 2010 when, after a serious accident, I was left with multiple fractures, a traumatic brain injury, and post-traumatic stress disorder. It took me 16 months at that time to return to work, initially part-time in a cubicle, which is not why I became a nurse. But I worked hard enough to end up in a role full-time as an endoscopy nurse in the hospital. However, the events of 2020, when I was reassigned to the emergency room during the first wave of the pandemic and all that came with that, proved overwhelming for my PTSD and led to a significant health collapse. The healthcare system failed me. Not only did I lose my job, but I struggled to obtain adequate treatment for my pain and my mental health issues. Despite years of experience advocating for my patients, I felt victimized and powerless. Only through the exploration of cannabis and psychedelic plant medicines did I find true healing, not just from the issues from 2020, but also from issues I had been told were incurable for over a decade. My experience with our healthcare system, both as an employee and as a patient, has shattered my heart. I embrace nursing as a profession because I am a nurse in my core, caring, compassionate, and dedicated to service. Unfortunately, our healthcare system, driven by the pursuit of shareholder profits, has lost touch with the core values of compassion, care, and have left me feeling without a place in its capitalist constraints. Turning to alternative solutions that offered more relief than conventional medicine, I broke free from the ingrained mindset of nursing and medical schools, which insists on double-blind, placebo-controlled trials for any kind of validation of treatments. Discovering plant medicines and exploring the mind-body connection not only transformed my life, but saved it. My journey also revealed a disheartening truth. Our healthcare and medical education systems were tainted long ago by profit-driven interests. We dismissed the wealth of knowledge of natural resources that had existed for thousands of years, choosing instead to patent and profit off those same remedies. We collectively prioritized science influenced by corporate interests over ancient wisdom. Today, by sharing our stories and presenting all of this evidence, we hope to start to dismantle this stigma and misinformation that has unjustly rejected these substances for far too long. The significance of psychedelic medicines such as psilocybin can no longer be ignored. Humans have safely used the psychedelic effects of plants and fungi for thousands of years. It's really the last 50-odd years of fear and prohibition by the US government that halted the significant research that was happening in the 1940s through the 1960s. Research that yielded compelling evidence and findings that were applied readily to treatment at the time. We've heard a bit, so I'll summarize here about the early findings of the effects on alcoholism, anxiety, and depression, and how participants in these studies and patients who were being treated by revolutionary therapists at the time were noting long-lasting positive effects on well-being and satisfaction in life, even with a single dose of some of these medications. Recent studies just from last year on psilocybin noted a really surprising reduction in anxiety and depression scores even 12 weeks after a single dose of psilocybin in treatment-resistant depression, which is important to note that for these subjects, psilocybin was the 4th or 5th or 6th line treatment for their depression, when literally every other available treatment for depression had failed. It's also important to note that these subjects increased productivity and lost productivity and increased their ability to work. We've seen increased positive mood, positive social effects, and all of these studies note no negative change in mood, no antisocial effects. Psilocybin also was noted to have both short and long-term effects on the immune system, which is another interesting area of study. And the overwhelming evidence for the use of psychedelics for substance abuse is, if there was a green flag for this, it should be that we are in the midst of a crisis of substance abuse. Additionally, and it's been stated already, that there is very little to no addictive potential for these medications. An assessment from 2010 did a ranking of illegal drugs based on their sort of danger profile. Alcohol came in at 72 out of 100, cannabis at 20 out of 100, psilocybin at 4. There is a risk of psychological dependence on the experience of using psilocybin, but it is crucial to distinguish this from physical addiction. I respect the work of, I do understand that Governor Lamont last year signed the bill allowing the psychedelic assisted therapy research to begin. And while this work is underway, I urge the lawmakers to consider the mistrust that exists toward the modern medical system, particularly from marginalized groups. People of color, women, veterans, and others express hesitancy to discuss drug use with their medical providers at all, let alone participate in studies within a system that has dismissed, abused, ignored, and deprioritized them for centuries. It is not enough to only allow these drugs in research settings. I urge the lawmakers of the state to hear us today when we tell you that waiting for FDA approval to decriminalize plant medicine shows the informed that you intend to place psilocybin solely in the hands of profit-driven corporations, making it unaffordable, undesired, and inaccessible for many, especially marginalized people who need this healing most. The overwhelming evidence supporting significant mental health benefits, even from a single use, calls for an end to criminalizing those who seek improvement through traditional plant medicines. As you can see here today, we have a community of experts and well-intentioned healers in this state who should not be criminalized for providing safe and meaningful healing to our communities. I believe this is a basic right instilled upon us by our founding fathers when they declared that all Americans be free to pursue their own happiness. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Capitani. Do we have any questions? Nope, seeing none, we will move on to our next speaker, who is Duncan Markovich from Better Ways, LLC.
Good afternoon. My name is Duncan Markovich, founder and owner of Better Ways, a cannabis therapeutic store in Brantford. I am grateful to have this opportunity to share my experiences with plant-based medicines, in particular psilocybin. My journey with this fantastic fungi is in part due to a lifetime of chronic health issues and my inexorable quest to better my body, mind, and beyond. Since birth, I've had 4 open heart surgeries. The last one was in 2010 when I was 23. A surgical complication led to almost losing my left leg, being bedridden for over 120 days, where my mortality was aggressively challenged in both practice and theory. The subsequent years have been a unique odyssey of dynamic healing, and it is because of these surgical watersheds I began to understand how safely microdosing psilocybin in my adulthood has helped my physical and mental health in profound ways. To balance the scales, I have also had safe macro experiences. Like with most things when it comes to plant-based medicines, it comes down to education and sourcing. Purity, preparation, protocol knowledge, professional observation, and a safe environment are stellar tenets for any experience. We must also remember, just like with cannabis and other plant-based medicines, these are individualized experiences. I have found that following the Thadaman protocol developed by psychologist and researcher James Fadiman, was a great paradigm aligned with my quest to not hallucinate, all the while aiming to enhance emotional well-being, specifically addressing the physical and mental traumas associated with my gauntlet of surgical experiences. After ingesting a microdose amount once every 3 days over a 2-week period, I found very quickly that my overall state of mind was happier and more collected, and in a physical capacity that the neuropathy in my left leg and constant daily nerve damage began to shift towards the positive. After repeating this protocol alternately over several months, I noticed further benefits that have remained to this day. These psychedelic mushroom strains help to naturally balance our serotonin and dopamine levels while simultaneously supporting a healthy dendrite life cycle throughout our body's nervous system. Dendrites are responsible for healthy communication between neurons. You can extrapolate the litany of positive medical applications with this medicine. I attribute my neuropathic healing with this dendrite support, along with findings from Paul Stamets on the neuroregenerative and neuroanti-inflammatory properties found in psilocybin analogs. These derivatives help stimulate neuron growth and help activate proteins necessary for stimulating nerve growth factors. When all of these compounds are working in unison, the synergistic reaction is far-reaching. As our species is at a fundamental tipping point in the next evolution of our consciousness, I'll leave you with this quote by Paul Stamets, who I had the pleasure of meeting a few weeks ago at the very special birthday party celebration for Alex Gray and Rick Doblin. Psilocybin is the spark that will lead to a quantum leap in our consciousness, and psilocybin helps you laugh. In the aftermath of the pandemic and opiate epidemic, we all have a profound opportunity and equal responsibility for healing individually and collectively as a society. It would behoove us to return back to the thousands of years of plant-based medicine knowledge and wisdom and shed the unsustainable yoke and more often shackles of pharmaceuticals and their spurious side effects. Now is the time to take part in something profoundly evolutionary and enduring, instead of perpetuating a system that only supports our bodies and minds with a reactive, symptom-based approach instead of a greatly needed roots-based diagnosis model. I am hopeful that the conversations held today with our legislators, medical professionals, and vast network of highly educated, skilled, compassionate, and professional healers to create a safe and sustainable framework as these plant-based medicines become more and more reintegrated into our society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Duncan. Any questions for Mr. Markovich? Seeing none, we will move to Tyler DeStefano as our next speaker.
Hi, everybody. I'm not nearly as smart as some of these like doctors and lawyers and lawmakers, so my experience is mainly anecdotal. So I'll give you a little bit of history. I have a congenital disorder, which I've had 24 surgeries altogether, including an amputation. I've survived a car crash where I was hit on a bike where the car was going in excess of 90 miles an hour when I was 15 years old. I've been diagnosed and treated with PTSD, and also I have a bachelor's in health science from the University of Hartford over here, and a minor in psychology. So I have a bit of keen insight as to the actual side of it. And I'm also part of the National Institute of Health PTSD ketamine study. We got to find a different word than plant medicine. Fungi are actually closer related to animals than plants. The chitin of a fungi cell wall is actually closer to an exoskeleton for like a beetle. So different verbiage might be good, because I know we talk about education. So like the actual fungus itself is worldwide, naturally occurring, and it grows out of the ground. What we're also talking about is a chemical called psilocybin. Not a lot of people are familiar with like how that's created or the synthesization process of it. So basically, it starts off as a tryptophan, which is an amino acid. You guys are probably pretty familiar with that. Then that gets turned into tryptamine through decarboxylation. Then 2 methylation steps turn it into DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which is a naturally occurring psychoactive chemical that occurs in every living thing's brain. From there, it's turned into psilocin through hydroxylation, and then psilocybin. and that is an agonist of the 5-HT serotonin receptor in the brain, which is, again, in every living person's brain. So I think I have a bit of keen insight as to what happens when you get into trauma, and then also how the psilocybin can help and work. So people don't really understand what really is the mind, what is consciousness, or what are your dreams or imagination. It all kind of exists in your mind. So your mind has the capability to not tell the truth to itself. You have the capability to actually tell yourself lies and to put a cage around your own mind. Now, that's to protect yourself. It's a survival mechanism. When inordinate things happen to you and they cause you inordinate amounts of stress, and those abnormal things you start to think of as more normal. Your mind formats itself in a way so it can survive and make itself easier to adapt to that situation. The psilocybin allows you to kind of step back from your internal modality of your mind and then kind of reassess that. Now, that can be done with other chemicals, but it seems like psilocybin actually works the best. It has the capability to show you kind of like interconnectedness and different pattern recognition that you might not normally see. And this, we know, actually can help break down different types of mental caging, what they call it. And you can get more to like your basic self, because we know that like the actual deep down like soul itself, or like your consciousness, can't really be affected by anything physically. It just can't. So anything that affects your internal consciousness is something that's internal also, that you put on yourself. So another internal thing is needed to correct that. And that's kind of where people have been talking about the intention of it. Like, you can't just like eat it and hope that it's going to work. You kind of have to know what you're doing it for. That's why we call it a medicine, not just a substance. But I can go further into actually what I've experienced with this and other types of plant medicine, or other types of fungi or synthetic medicines. I also have a lot of experience taking other medications and prescribed a couple of psychiatric medications at the moment. And that's another thing too, is like the method of modality for psilocybin itself in the brain is the exact same as some of the medications I'm on. We're talking about serotonin receptor agonists and reuptake inhibitors, which are the main types of prescriptions that are for psychiatric evaluation anyway. So why don't we use something that's like naturally occurring instead of getting like these chemicals that are like put together in the laboratory that just kind of mimic something that exists naturally anyway. That's all I got. If you guys have any questions, I'm here.
Or just limit the claps just because of the audio. It just makes things a little bit difficult. But yeah, are there any questions for Tyler? Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned that you've experienced quite a bit of physical trauma. Is there any correlation between your experience with psychedelics or psilocybin specifically and recovery?
No. So actually, the actual recovery from all of my like surgical operations and when I experienced the car accident, that's all been traditional Western medicine. And so I'll tell you, I was prescribed Vicodin when I was about 14 years old. And then from there, other prescription opiate painkillers that are like powerful enough for like adult males. And I was given to them at adolescence. So I can tell you right now that the naturally occurring things that I've experienced are a lot more powerful, but I've never actually had them in like a actual recovery capacity. It was kind of just more on my own experimentation. The what got me started was cannabis and marijuana specifically, because nothing got rid of like my mental state, but I found that that really did help. And even though it was like criminally illegal back when I first started using it, like so much so that I'm not sure if most people remember, like residue in a piece of glass could get you in jail. So that was kind of tough for me to deal with when I'm 16, 17. But that's actually my personal victory, because everybody else had to change. I didn't have to change. And so I feel the same way with psilocybin and also a couple other chemicals too. So if you guys want to keep doing this thing where everybody just kind of like is addicted to OxyContin and then we have to go and sue Purdue Pharma for $10 billion because they destroyed the country, that's great. But I'd rather just grow stuff in my backyard if that's cool.
We're going to hopefully make it cool. It's not yet, but we're working on it. And so, but thank you so much for your time and your testimony. And I would just want to plus one the concern around the term plant medicines, as we are talking about very specific molecules, and one of which definitely comes from a fungus. And so as we're thinking about educating each other, children, et cetera, on the science, we should be as accurate as possible. But thank you, Tyler, for your time. Next, we're going to move over to Melissa.
All right. So hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Maychak. I am a person in long-term recovery. I have a lot of lived experience with physical trauma, mental health issues. I am over 7 years into my lifetime recovery journey. This time around, I've got 7 years, and a lot of that is credited to plant medicine and psilocybin and other psychedelics. So a little background about me is I am a recovery support specialist. That means that I am certified to work at the intersection of lived experience, mental health, and substance use. So I use my lived experience to support others. I also have a clinical degree in drug and alcohol counseling. I'm a certified yoga instructor, certified recovery advisor, and I have a full-time job in addiction in Connecticut. And I also am the president of The Movement, which is a recovery and harm reduction and addiction awareness nonprofit in Connecticut. So I have an extensive knowledge, both professional and personal lived experience with psychedelic use, safe use, harm reduction, all of that stuff. So I'm coming to speak to you guys today from a lens of harm reduction. This is something that I'm like super passionate about. So harm reduction is a term that, decriminalization falls under harm reduction, but there's a lot of other things that fall under harm reduction also. Harm reduction is basically, I like to define it as a term where people are engaging in unsafe use of anything or doing an unsafe behavior. And it's a way to reduce the harm not only to them, but society as a whole and others around them. So if you smoke cigarettes and you smoke cigarettes with filter tips in it, you're engaging in harm reduction. If you wear bicycle helmets, if you wear a seatbelt, then you're also engaging in harm reduction. And also coming from a place of recovery, we're here talking about decriminalizing and, taking the criminal aspect away of possession of psilocybin, which is scientifically proven to reduce mental health symptoms. There's other, like psychedelic medication that is also like ketamine, which is for physical health symptoms. I was in a car accident 15 months into my recovery, and psilocybin and ketamine have been the only things that have reset my mental and physical health. So it's important to address not only use itself, but the impact that use has on other people in the community. And we heard already several people talk about the legal impact, the unregulated market that comes with not having safe access. The lack of education provides, a extension and repeat of the stigma, and lack of education also promotes like legislation not being passed because people are basing their opinions on fear mongering. And it really needs to be stressed that psychedelics are classified as a Schedule 1 controlled substance, which means that they are not known to have any medical relief at all and have a high potentiation for abuse, which alcohol is legal. We're talking about psilocybin being a way to combat alcoholism and addiction, yet alcohol is legal. There's scientific proof that it does harm to your body, the car accidents that are related to it, yet people don't really care because the revenue that's produced by alcohol, it lines people's pockets. So I really want to stress to legislators to really do educating themselves, do research, talk to people, get not only lived experience, but professional experience, There's, science behind this stuff. It's not something that somebody's just saying, well, this is a fun time and I want to do this. Also, we were talking about the ways that youth, can access things that are supposed to be for adults. I can't tell you how many people actually go to the package store and purchase alcohol and then go give it to a minor, so people who do that, but then want to look down upon natural medicine, and someone else had mentioned too, psychiatry and big pharma and the way that they promote things that are synthetic based off of naturally occurring substances in order to profit off of them. And they, don't look at decriminalizing things. I just want to also state that, not not decriminalizing, not educating, not taking the time to talk to people about it is actually promoting harm. If you're not part of the solution, then you're part of the problem. So there's that. That's all I got. Thanks.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you for sharing your personal story with us. Are there any questions for Melissa? All right, seeing none, we will move on to our next speaker, who is Sarita White. I believe she is via Zoom. Is she still here? If not, we will move to Colleen Fogg.
My name is Dr. Colleen Fogg, and I've been a clinical pharmacist serving patients with psychiatric illnesses at Connecticut Mental Health Center for the past 6 years. Since joining the blossoming academic psychedelic community of New Haven, which I came to because of the Yale Psychedelic Science Group co-founded by Dr. Sloshower, I have embarked on a deep learning journey about psychedelics. During this journey, locally and abroad, I've met hundreds, if not thousands, of psychedelic users. Through these connections, I've learned something very important, that psychedelics profoundly change people's lives. I've also learned that many psychedelic users who have found healing, or those that want to, have difficulty finding local community and resources to help them maximize benefits and minimize risks. The stigma, illegality, and fear surrounding psychedelics forces people into the shadows, making it challenging to adequately prepare for and integrate their experiences. As a pharmacist, I know that it is important for a consumer to be informed before using any medication and equipped with the appropriate resources to use that medication safely. That's why I started the Elm City Psychedelic Society in New Haven, a public group fostering a community for those interested in psychedelics through support, advocacy, education, and discussion. We offer a variety of sober events, including lectures, potlucks, music groups, movie screenings, and peer integration groups. Psychedelic integration is taking the insights, wisdom, and realizations or emotions experienced during a psychedelic journey and applying it to one's life to facilitate meaningful change. And this process often benefits from the support of others. Elm City Psychedelic Society has over 200 members, and whenever a new person shows up to an event, I ask, what brings you here? And echoing people in the room, reason sounds like I tried multiple antidepressants and nothing worked, and then I had mushrooms and it helped, or I didn't know who I was anymore. I felt so lost, and I did mushrooms and I found myself. Or I am a veteran and I've helped heal my PTSD, and I want to know how I can help my other veteran brothers and sisters access this medicine. Or even I read Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind, and I think mushrooms could really help me, the pollen effect. Connecticut residents are out here safely using psychedelics and seeking information so that they can use them safely. Pillars of psychedelic safety are set, the mindset of an individual entering the experience, and setting, the actual physical and cultural environment in which the experience occurs. With education and preparation, especially in a world of decriminalization that does not engender fear, paranoia, or isolation, I believe most reasonable adults are capable of safely and successfully using psychedelics to better their lives, with or without supervision, depending on the person and their medical and psychological history. Psilocybin mushrooms have been used safely for thousands of years, and the theoretical lethal dose is about 1,000 times the effective dose. You'd have to eat pounds and pounds of dry mushrooms to even get there, and it would not likely happen. Only one lethality has ever been reported, and it was a woman who had a heart transplant that was medically fragile. We already talked about the low risk for abuse and lack of physical dependence and some side effects. So I'm going to skip this section with the time limit and move on to basically that psilocybin. It doesn't have a lot of physical harms, not a lot of drug interactions, and no substances without risk. Those risks are primarily psychological, and with education, the risk of these effects is reduced. As a society, we allow adults to legally use alcohol despite known harms. 261 US adults die alcohol-related deaths each day. On July 7th, 2022, my brother was one of them. He died of alcoholic liver failure at 30 years old. An estimated 28.8 million other adults currently suffer from alcohol use disorder, their use contributing to $10 billion plus in tax revenue per year. The Controlled Substance Act schedules and restricts the use of substances with a high potential for physical and psychological dependence and abuse. By these criteria, one might expect alcohol to be scheduled, but it's not, because as a society, we have decided that it is the prerogative of an adult to choose whether or not to ingest alcohol despite its known harms. Psilocybin is placed in the most restrictive schedule despite not meeting these criteria. It does demonstrate medical utility, and it has a low potential for abuse and dependence. In fact, it can even be used to help people suffering from addictions. In clinical research, the number needed to treat is calculated to estimate the number of people that must be treated with a medication in order for it to be successful for one person. The number needed to treat for first-line treatments for alcohol use disorder, acamprosate and oral naltrexone, are 11 and 18 respectively to prevent one person from returning to drinking. The number needed to treat for psilocybin was 4.3. This is a small study, but it warrants significant further inquiry. Psilocybin could help people suffering like my brother, who once told me he would never do mushrooms because they are illegal, and now he'll never have the chance. In summary, research is legitimizing the utility of psilocybin for symptoms of conditions ranging from anxiety, depression, substance use disorders, and much more, but access to treatment remains low. It's hard to get into a study, and it's hard to find. People are and will continue seeking psychedelics on their own, as they have been forever. We should not criminalize people for trying to become happy, healthier human beings with the help of mushrooms. I also just wanted to comment on the children's access thing and point that out that is a medication storage problem as well. On my way up here on 91, I passed a billboard that said, I think it was 50,000 ER visits per year of kids taking medications. A lot of them a lot more physically dangerous than psilocybin. So that is a medication storage issue. Like any other medication, they should be kept locked in a way. So check out that billboard for the link for more info.
Right on. Thank you, Colleen. Any questions for Dr. Fogg? No, seeing none, we'll move on to our next speaker, Pastor Brian Rajak. Raychak.
Yep.
Thank you for that. From the St. Matthew Lutheran Church. Take it away. You have the floor.
Thank you. Great to be here today. So I'm Brian Raychak. I'm a Lutheran pastor at St. Matthew Lutheran Church in Avon, Connecticut. In addition to being a pastor, I am a pastoral counselor and recently finished my PhD in pastoral counseling, for which I wrote my dissertation on spiritually significant psychedelic experiences by interviewing mental health therapists. I also completed a certificate program in psychedelic therapy and research from California Institute of Integral Studies. From my research in this field, it is clear to me that many people have had spiritually significant psilocybin experiences that have changed their lives for the better. In addition to the mental health benefits described by others speaking today, I have come to share with you that there is tremendous religious and spiritual value in the experiences facilitated by psilocybin mushrooms. Participants in psilocybin research studies often report in follow-up interviews that their experiences have alleviated or completely erased their fear of death, help them to recognize a greater unity with humanity, and help them live in greater alignment with the divine. These are often referred to as positive persisting effects in the research. And I'm excited about the opportunity that psilocybin offers religious and spiritual people to grow closer to God. My research has shown me that there is good reason that indigenous cultures use psilocybin in religious rituals for centuries. Unfortunately, current drug laws prevent religious people from legally having such experiences today. Our country was founded upon the belief in freedom of religion. The criminalization of psilocybin makes illegal a spiritual practice that many have found very meaningful and spiritually transformative. I encourage our state to decriminalize psilocybin and allow for the freedom of religious individuals to explore the sacred states of consciousness that psilocybin facilitates. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your time. Are there any questions for the good pastor?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask if you had some familiarity with Connecticut's structure for like religious use of psychedelics, like if there have been any sort of initiatives for legal out church or things like that.
Yeah, so well, I do know that there are like ayahuasca churches that have legal protection in the state and throughout the country. That's more of a national thing. So not specifically with psilocybin, but and I think the ones that I do know about are more on a federal level that it's protected. So, but yeah, there are entheogenic churches that are out there, and it would be, I think, a religious freedom issue to allow, whether or not you're part of, different ayahuasca churches or churches that are legally protected, like the Native American Church or the UDV or the San Damiano ayahuasca churches. It would be important, I think, to allow members of any churches or any religious organizations or anyone, even if you're not part of an organized religion, to use these plants and fungi as spiritual tools. Thank you. Good question.
Any other questions for the pastor? If not, seeing none, thank you so much. We very much appreciate your time and look forward to you and all the other amazing speakers here joining us again when we do have the actual public hearing that is going to happen during this session. And so definitely hope everybody can continue to advocate between now and then and making sure that we are bringing the full weight of expertise of our state and our nation to making sure this happens. And so thank you so much for your time. So that is exhausting our list that we have for speakers so far. We do have some folks that may be on the Zoom. I don't know if there's anybody. Oh, well, let's give her a shot. And if not, we can wrap it up.
Yeah, I'll just make some comments, just thanking all the panelists for coming and
Voice of God enters the room.
and sharing, no, and sharing the information from everybody's perspective. That was a very informational forum, and I really thank you as well for putting this list together. So thank you very much to everyone for bringing in their viewpoints. It was again very enriching.
Great. So I think with that, then we can conclude this public forum on the decriminalization of psychedelic mushrooms in the state of Connecticut. Thank you all so much for joining us. Session starts on February 7th. And so we hope to see you all up here advocating and lobbying in the halls of power and throughout the session. And again, for folks that are looking for more information, it is capm.nationbuilder.org or com, right? One of those two, you'll find it. Connecticut for accessible psychedelic medicine. We will be having community events throughout the state and working on this throughout the session. So please get in touch with us if you would like to join the movement. Otherwise, thank you all so much, everyone, for being here, and we will see you next time.